Excellent. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the Board of Regents May meeting. Having spoke to several regents, I hope you enjoyed your time in beautiful Helena, Montana last night. I know several regents went on runs and exercised and enjoyed Helena's restaurant. So as a Helenan, I'm glad you had a good time in our city. We will just jump in. We've got a really, really busy morning here. So we'll jump in for some remarks from Superintendent Arnson of OPI.
One second.
Is it New York City?
That was a highlight.
After watching Jared's skills with the tracking monitors, I better redefine the word run.
A brisk hike.
Welcome, Elsie. Welcome
Good
to the
morning.
meeting.
It looks like I'm a little frozen. Are you coming through on your end?
We can see you just fine. Yeah.
Perfect, perfect. Well, it's not so much in the picture as it is in the words. Want to say congratulations to all campuses in successful graduations, and think of the resiliency of our students that have come from Montana Public Schools or for wherever they may come and have enjoyed the journey in your classrooms and now have crossed that stage successfully. So great kudos for that. We are in a great partnership and we're celebrating our graduation as well. And I also want to say thank you in our partnership again in that assessment world. You know, we have the ACT and we are looking at how many students have completed because that will show then that path forward, as well as the pre-ACT. And I do realize that the purpose of the test may have changed in your world, in our world as well. We're learning from this pandemic and we're learning that there are different needs associated with different students because of their unique abilities. So I believe, you know, this is all a reflection even after the amount of time that we have spent in trying to see exactly what does this pandemic mean. And I'll come back to that personal part. It's been personal for all of us, all of you within your different how do I want to say, geographic areas and who you serve. So I gave you a document and I don't want to reiterate that. I'm not one that reads a PowerPoint, but there is a great opportunity here in discussing what these federal dollars can be. And it just seems that there is more. We have 9 million coming for special education students. We also have 2 opportunities with homeless students. And that homeless will amount to about a $2.9, $2.5 million enhancement for homeless. And this is outside of all of the dollars that were captured in the legislative action. We also have 20 million that came from the federal government through the governor's office for our non-publics. So we have I say a yacht of money, not just a boat of money. We have a lot of money that's going to be giving great opportunities. And I believe that's where our partnership can be. I firmly believe in that P20 look. I believe that our students have a great opportunity to complete. And I'm a lifelong learner, as all of you sitting around your tables and listening and viewing and working hard, that we are a lifelong learning. And I would like to offer that partnership again in the interim. Our job in the interim is to make sure that we show that we're not a separate entity, that we do work for all of Montana, and especially in my world, the youth, but I think we're all young at heart as Montanans. So with that, Mr. Chair and members, And Commissioner, if you have questions of me, I'd be more than happy to answer. And I know our partnership is going to grow over these next couple months and years.
Thank you, Superintendent Arntzen, and thank you for sending your comments in advance. Are there any comments from any members of the board? Questions or comments? Seeing no comments, again, thank you, Superintendent, for joining us this morning, and we look forward to our partnership.
Thank you, Chair Lozar. And the other part, you didn't give me any homework, so that's good. But I do know that there are some questions that I can answer. We did have a bill that went through this last session on dual credit and dual enrollment. And I think we just need to unwrap what does that mean. There will be some rulemaking regarding that. But I believe our partnership is strong currently, and it can be even stronger with going forward into the future. So thank you. I wish you all well. Memorial Weekend is upon us. Let's remember who we were in Montana and who we are. 1 in 10 has served our great country from Montana. And I believe our heritage as being warriors in Montana is so strong. So with that, blessings to you. Stay well, and we'll visit again. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you.
Thank you. All right, let's transition to the Budget Administration and Audit Committee meeting. Regent Dabrowski.
Thank you, Chair Lozar. I just have to start by saying I'm not going to apologize for the length of the agenda. I've had many conversations with Deputy Commissioner Trevor about this particular May meeting, and it's one I think those of you who've served before are familiar. It's long because of the process of the legislature and many of the opportunities that provides for us. It's also long on the consent side, and I'm highly sensitive to a long consent and sort of moving through it too fast. But I trust that all of the board members have actually opportunity to look at the consent items, which is so critical to us moving into really what would be the meat of the committee. And then I also want to acknowledge our committee members. We actually had a couple of prep meetings before the budget committee. So members of my committee spent additional time, and I really appreciate that. That was hopefully very helpful. And those of you who aren't on the committee, obviously I've had conversations with you. I think it's really critical that if there are questions, that we don't try to move too fast, that we get the questions answered that you need to get answered as we move through, again, what I consider to be a very heavy agenda. So let me just start with, are there any items on the consent agenda that any of the board members want to pull off for further consideration? I wanted to call out Mike Reed's, he's number A on the consent agenda, but Commissioner Christian acknowledged his hiring yesterday. So again, there are the staff items, then there's the emeriti, and those are really wonderful accolades of retiring professors across the system. And so again, that really is edifying for me to read all those. And then, of course, the facility items. I know Ron knows those inside and out. If there's any need to be pulled.
We get the agenda on the screen.
Thanks. Yes, and we're at about other, as I'm moving through this, there's some policy language changes. And Deputy Commissioner Trevor, do you have any comments about any of these as I'm?
Chair Dombrowski, and you're right, we are sensitive to such a long consent agenda, and it's indicative of the number of meaty action items that we have here in front of us. I'd say about the facilities items, this is operations in the Montana University system occurring, and we have Director Muffick here who has the detail on all of these items. I would say that it's probably not the best use of our time to go through each one of those. They follow our policies of coming to the board for any item that is over 350,000 in renovations and repairs, construction. So they have all their unique flavors, but I would just say this is general operations occurring. I might be able to paint a little color around some of these in the other category here.
Please.
A few of these items have been before you as information items. For instance, the hotline related to internal audit. As any of these policy changes come first as information, they are scattered different house cleaning items related to policy. We also have embedded in here the insurance premium holiday that I talked about yesterday, the authority to go ahead with that. That'll certainly be talked about as we talk about the state appropriations. Just a few other, I guess, in the same vein as the facilities were general operations in facilities realm. These are in the administrative realm. So we'd be happy to answer any questions if someone has of these, but again, I think the best use of our time is on the bulk of the action items.
Okay, seeing no, I'm asked for a removal of consent to the action item. We'll just go to the action item, which is again, very complicated. And yet I would say I would give Deputy Commissioner Trevor a lot, and Shauna, and certainly Ron too, a lot of accolades for putting this together. So I'll just turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair Dombrowski. I'm going to open up for you here the actual item, and we won't spend a lot of time on this. In fact, if you wanted to, this item says it all, and as quickly and as succinctly as we can, tell you what we have in store for you here in the it's sort of a wrapped approach to and connected approach to setting tuition and fees in conjunction with the allocation of state appropriations, which also uses a mechanism called performance funding. So we feel that these are intrinsically related topics and bring them to you as one bulk item. I could scroll in here a little bit and just review.
Yeah.
Okay, tuition. We propose a resident undergraduate freeze in FY22, an increase of resident undergraduate tuition of 3% in FY23. That's the basic sound bites in the tuition request. We have varying rates of increase between resident graduates, non-resident students, and I'll talk about those more as we get into the tuition portion of the presentation. Fees, we hold annual increase in mandatory fees to no more than 3% per year on each campus. We have different categories of fees in addition to mandatory, such as course and program fees, and I'll talk to you about those in detail. State appropriations, we request the allocation of $8.5 million of state appropriation for present law in the second year of the biennium, as well as $2 million for the pay plan in the second year. So most of the action of the allocation, if not all of it, is occurring in the second year, although we'll talk about the first year in more detail as we move through the presentation. And then finally, we have performance funding. It says 13.8, but it's actually a typo there, 13.5 million to be designated out of the $15 million of performance funding. So with that, Chair Dombrowski, if it's all right, I'll go into tuition.
Please.
And move through this at the speed that I can control this mouse. If anybody has the controls to back up one, that'd be great. Thank you. and then open that tuition link right there. Okay, I think I'll be able to scroll through this. The front page here is a summary of all of the percent increases by the varying levels of student level and residency. So resident undergraduate FY22, you see the sort of matrix there for all of the campuses. We're at 0. And then you can just kind of review through non-resident undergraduates. The 2 flagship campuses propose an increase of 4%. I'd stop, I guess, and just mention something about non-resident undergraduate tuition rates. Those are very market driven, very enrollment management and strategy of each campus related to the national recruitment of students. We also use a discounting strategy to recruit non-resident students. So we rely upon campus experts in this realm for sure. Western undergraduate tuition, otherwise known as WUI, is 150% of resident undergraduate. So that's going to follow along with all of our resident increases. Resident graduate and non-resident graduate vary by campus, but none of them more than 5% increases. And then resident 2-year colleges, obviously we have embedded 2-year at some of the campuses that aren't the standalone 2-year, and you'll see that those are at 0. And then non-resident 2-year. And so on through FY23, you'll see the 3% increase across the board for resident undergraduates. That's basically what differs in FY23.
Chair Lowe's, Deputy Commissioner Trevor, you said that both campuses, or main campuses, were 4%, but one MSU's 5% on that chart.
Mr. Chair, Regent Bao, in the second year of the biennium, they did kick it up 1%. MSU did. I believe in the first year of the biennium, both campuses were at 4%.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Got it. Thanks.
So I have next 3 slides here are basically just reference material if you wanted to get into the exact tuition rates. I should also say that when I clicked into this presentation, immediately to the right of the link to get into the presentation are the actual tuition and fee matrices that when you approve this item, that's what the regents are approving, or the detail submitted to us by the campuses. They're quite complex and hefty files that I just try to summarize here for you. So that's really what I'm doing here in these slides. It's just giving people an opportunity to look at the different rates in FY22 and FY23 with the percent increase directly below them. What I really want to get to for you, the budget committee and the full board here is, so how do we measure ourselves? When we talk about either freezing tuition in the first year or increasing it 3% for resident undergraduates in the second year, what are our benchmarks? And when we talk about tuition, we often couple it with fees. So those mandatory fees to give the audience, the students, the parents, the information they need to know. What is the annual bill that would be charged to a student who is enrolled full-time in both semesters? And so rather than just do an analysis on tuition, I included fees here, knowing though that tuition makes up the bulk of these numbers. And then to break out by mission parameter, MSU and U of M are flagship campuses. Montana Tech here in the center, our special focus campus. And then the 4 regional baccalaureate master's level campuses, MSUB Northern and UM Western, and compare them to their peers in the region. So WICHE being the name for the Western Interstate Commission on Higher Education, has 15 states that belong to it. We use their data, and you can see that for our flagship campuses, we are approximately $2,000 below the regional average. Montana Tech and its very narrow set of peers in the special focus is quite a bit below, and we could get into some of those details if you wanted to. And then the regional four-year campuses, again, you're going to see a gap there approaching $2,000 lower. So, and I would say this is on purpose. This is something that we have worked on for the last 15 to 20 years. And I'm going to show you some charts here coming up on that progress. So there's our four-year campuses. The picture's a little bit different for two-year, and it has been for the last 15 to 20 years. Two-year rates 20 years ago were quite a bit above the average, and we've frozen two-year tuition and fees more than we haven't in the last 15 years. And so you see there's the rates in the Wichita region, about 4,300, and all of the MUS campuses are below that. Just to look at non-resident undergraduate tuition and fees, and you can see MSU and U of M right around the Wichita average, maybe a little bit above. Montana Tech, again, below its set of peers, and our regional four-year campuses real close to the average. So there again, you see campuses with an eye towards the market. Now, if you look at the question at the state level here, well, where do we rank just as a state when you look at the average by state at our doctoral flagship campuses? And you can see Montana there down by Wyoming, which has traditionally been a very affordable, low-cost four-year offerings, and then the remainder of the states in the Wichita region. And our regional four-year campuses relatively in the same category. I would mention just as a plug here for a lot of hard work that went into developing a dashboard related to tuition and fees. And there'll be a day when I can control this mouse on this screen and I'd just be clicking through a dashboard and showing you all this dynamically. John Thunstrom and Eric Meredith in our office have almost redefined how cool it is to develop things in Tableau. And then we go down to the two-year campuses. They're moving up a little bit. They're more along the mainstream pricing, I would say, closer to the average. And I guess this is really what I was anxious to show, because this is a picture between the 2006 era, pre-tuition freeze era, and now. And you see that as tuition as a percent of household income has been, I don't know, Commissioner, probably one of the hallmark metrics that we've used when setting tuition and fees and evaluating affordability for Montanans. And you see where we were in 2006, almost the highest in the Wichita region. And if we had the right data, and I'm sure we probably do, going back a little bit further, we may well have been the highest at one point in time. And now we've moved that dial all the way back to below the average, where we want to be, more affordable. We can take that same view for our regional four-year campuses. Same general trend there, maybe not quite as dramatic. And then you see a little different picture for two-year campuses again. They were quite a bit above that average. And even though we've frozen tuition there that many times, and I say that many times, I'm almost every year since 2006, to get us back to where we're at there. So really what you're seeing here is these static views of our tuition and fees dashboard. So keeping on that same trend of looking back 15 years and analyzing the tuition rates by the Wichita region compared to Montana, that kind of red dotted line is the Wichita average, and in orange there you see Montana, and we intersect in around 2008, the beginning of a tuition freeze era, and as a result have remained relatively flat. This is in constant dollars.
Go back one slide. This really has been kind of the North Star for us, to be honest. And, those earlier slides, you see us below the WICHE average, and some would ask, well, what are we doing there? But this per household income has been what it's all about. In my time on the board and in this role, that was sort of the benchmark that we tried to hit, at least be an average bite out of family income. And so I'm really proud of the work that we've done here. It shows us right at that line. I think that's where we've tried to get and where we want to try to stay. I think that's the right spot for us.
Go ahead, Chair Lozer.
Thank you, Chair Dombrowski. I was going to say something very similar. I think this is something we should be really proud of really making tuition and fees affordable to Montana families. I always love these slides. I guess my question is, these are slides just sort of based on output, but not based on us thinking about personal household income when we're actually driving these discussions on tuition freezes or tuition rates. And I'm just curious, obviously we're doing well in this category, but I'm curious if other states use this personal household income as a benchmark when they're having discussions like we're having.
Chair Dombrowski, Chair Lozar, absolutely. These are, as I'm bragging about our dashboard related to tuition and fees, WICHE has one that is equally dynamic. And this is one of the focused metrics that they have on there, coming from another state and working in a system office, very much similar to ours in Nevada. That was a metric that we used. So I would absolutely say yes. I don't know to the degree in those other states, but that's the experience I've had.
Any other questions? Okay.
Question.
Please.
Chair Dombrowski, Commissioner Tyler or Clay. So what else can we say? Like, when we look at all this data, I'm sure you didn't set out in 2006 to say, we're going to match personal household income and we're going to hold it for 14 years, because nobody would have kept their job in that situation, right? So, I think what it shows to someone who's new to the board is, that it's a pretty big accomplishment to go back under the median when you have a focus on that as a particular goal. But what else can we say? What else did we learn from that experience? Like, what do we say it did to enrollment? What do we say it did to faculty retention? What do we say, that it did to academic outcomes over that time period? And I don't think it's in I'm not expecting it's in the presentation, but it just seems like it is a pretty remarkable accomplishment over the past 15 years to have gotten things back in line with affordability. So what else can we say about it?
Mr. Commissioner, if I might dive into the Chair Dombrowski Regent bow. There's been tuition freezes. And when we first started in 2008, kind of the scare across the university system that's going to freeze expenditures. But that wasn't necessarily the case. We used other mechanisms to continue to grow our enterprise. And so through some change of statute and work that we did with the legislature to change law basically on the discounting of resident students. We made that move in 2015, and I think you'll see that reflected definitely in our operating budgets that we ask you to approve in September. But we're able to leverage non-resident tuition revenue to ensure that and subsidize resident students. So we found a formula for keeping resident students either flat or extremely low through this non-resident market. So I would say that's one item. And I don't know in 2006 if anybody thought that was going to be the case.
I don't know, Chair Dombrowski, Regent Bow. I would say that we did have a conscious discussion though around those drivers. Certainly around median household income as a primary driver for comparison's sake, but then also we talked quite a bit about state support. And our state support at that point had grown to sort of the lowest that it had historically ever been, from a high around 80% 86% down to like 32%. And we knew that those things had to move together, or you would get in a position where you're sort of shortchanging the academic quality, ability to recruit and retain high capable people. I tell a story, and it maybe has mixed reviews because not everyone likes to see the growth. But the first budget I voted for in your chairs 15 years ago was about $900 and some million. This is about a $1.6 billion budget. So there has been growth, but it's largely come not on the backs of students. It's come from increased state support and other revenue streams that have helped create the growth within the enterprise that we felt like we needed to meet those quality markers while trying to hit the affordability goals for Montana students. But I think that it was and has been very conscious that those things all needed to work together, and that the end goal for affordability had to be with us getting around that median household income number, that we had to increase state support. I think it's a message that's been well received by now 3 governors and a number of different legislatures that felt like, yeah, that is where we need to be competitive in higher education in Montana, recruiting and retaining not only the right people on the business end, but the right students to Montana to ultimately meet workforce and economic needs. I think it's been very deliberate, to be honest. And I think it's served us pretty well to have sort of that long-term vision of where we're going.
And Mr. Commissioner, if I could add on to that, I guess the best way I see it is to look at it through the lens of the partnerships we were able to develop with the legislature. If you looked at our state appropriations from 1992 to 2005, we went down $7 million in nominal dollars. And from 2005 to now, that increase is about 100 million. And so there's something going on there. Our ability to partner with the legislature through things like performance funding that we're going to talk about, the shared policy goals, those have opened up the ability for the university system and the regions really to freeze tuition and affect this affordability trend. Otherwise, we were going to be on the same trajectory as that WICHE average. It would cost $10,000 per year in the state of Montana for a resident undergraduate to go to school.
Yeah, Regent Powell, freezing tuition had an interesting soundbite, and people like that soundbite. But the truth is, when we really talk about it in the appropriate terms, what we truly did is, with legislative help and other revenue streams, we bought down tuition increases. We replaced those necessary increases. Instead of having it on the backs of students, we had it on the backs of other funding streams, including state support, and ultimately kept us where we needed to be in terms of the enterprise growth. And that growth has been modest. The truth is, it's been in line with where it should be, but it has been there, and it's been appropriate, and it's helped us maintain the quality piece. But that's actually what happened. When we say tuition freeze, we really mean that we were fortunate enough to have other ways to pay for what would have been tuition increases.
Right.
And Mr. Commissioner, I think what makes us unique in the nation is that we've frozen tuition. Other states have frozen tuition, but you'll often see a jump in tuition that follows that. We've had now a 16-year history of, we had 1 year in 2017 where we made, at some campuses, not all, because we froze billings in that year as well, some jumps. But other than that, outside of that, this has been extremely small.
Thank you, Commissioner and Deputy Commissioner. Just one quick follow-up, and so it'd be interesting if we think about it as buying down, that process. Then it'd be interesting to see where the infill came from. How much was from the legislature? How much was from non-resident? How much was from required fees, changes in the way required fees are not asking for it today? Maybe it's going to come up today, but it'd be interesting for me. Thank you.
Yeah, those are the sources.
Regent Buchanan.
Thanks, Chair Dombrowski. And to Chair, that was a good question. I mean, I think one thing that we're in isolation talking about tuition right now. And so the cost of attendance has not stayed flat. We have raised fees, the system has seen, so our resident students have not seen flat costs. And so it's important that as we interpret this conversation about affordability, there's other levers that are having an impact as well. And as we further discuss some of this, I think it's important that we learn what have been the trends and the cost increases that we've seen from some of the other sources to the resident students.
Yeah. Chair Dombrowski, as you can, that's absolutely right. I would say that we have had some of the most modest fee increases as well in the country. And you know, we've been, the direction out of this office and from the board in the past has been, you know, don't use that as the replacement. That's not the backfill. We have sort of tried to keep pace, but the guidance out of this office for 10 years has been that any increase has to be more in line with CPI than it does anything else. It can't be a revenue replacer. So those have been in the 2 and 3% range, which has driven costs. You're absolutely spot on, but it has done it with modest increase in mind. Where we've gained, and we can get more specific on the numbers, but where we've gained most of the revenue advantage has been through state support and leveraging non-resident tuition as best we can.
Thank you. Final comment from my side is it's an impressive strategic shift, and it certainly brought some good results. And so I'm coming at it from the perspective of, you know, what does the next 15 years look like? And you know, if we have to make those kind of decisions, it's really helpful to have that specific information because, you know, we all are tasked with improving the quality and growing the, you know, the academic experience. So thank you. Interesting.
Excellent.
Thank you, Chair Dombrowski. Deputy Commissioner Trevor, my question is very much in line with Regent Bowes and Regent Buchanan's. I wanted to know if you had, while you're kind of piecing together where these fundings have come from, what percentage is based on which. I would like to know kind of how reliant we are on non-resident tuition.
Yeah.
And again, I know forecasting is hard, so I'm sorry about this question right away, but you know, there isn't really a forecast on how this could affect enrollment in the future. And again, on what some of that sustainability is in terms of those non-residents. So as you're kind of working on those pieces, I would love to hear more about that. One really basic question, and I'm not going to call it a stupid question, is
No, stupid.
all of these percentages in fiscal year 23, that is a total percent increase, right? Based on the base year, you're not adding a percentage and then adding another increase.
It's year-over-year percent increase, Madam Chair.
So would we have for example, MSU has non-resident undergraduate in 23. Will that be a total increase of 9% or?
Over that 2-year period of time, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent questions. Any others? Okay, please.
And Chair Dombrowski and Regents, no dumb questions. That was a good question and it's not obvious, and I'll do a better job of presenting that in the future. Marlis, if you could back me up a notch there, I can't really use my mouse much. Technology has passed me by. I don't know how. And then if we can get that. As it comes by.
I'm rooting for you.
There we go. All right, fees. Tuition's, you know, pretty basic. It's got its categories. Fees have a little bit different slant. We're going to talk about mandatory fees, and I'm going to show you our policy and what those mandatory fees are made up of. And then we have program fees, course fees, other designated fees throughout the system, room and board, and then finally, as Regent Buchanan mentioned, an analysis of cost of attendance. In fact, regents have a policy that say we're not going to increase tuition and fees at any time without a complete analysis of the cost of attendance. And so I'll provide that in summary at the end of this. Over here on the left part of this slide, I don't dare click on one of those. I probably couldn't get my mouse there anyway, but I don't dare open one because I'd shoot me into Excel and I'd have the depth of all of the different tuition matrices combined with the fee matrices by campus. Director Lyons is the keeper of these, and she knows that world, and we certainly utilize those files. So I don't want to just skim over them, but for the purposes of presenting, it's not very conducive. So I'll just dive right in. Mandatory fees, those are the fees charged to every student, regardless of the services that you're using or not. Everyone pays an athletic fee, for instance, whether you go to a game or not. You pay a health fee, you pay a building and facilities fee, computer and technology fee. We did quite a bit of work on this, now probably 3 or 4 years ago, to normalize these categories across the system so we could do some analysis by campus. We have a dashboard attached to these. You can look at a 10-year history on any campus of any one of these fees. This is the parameter when I talk about that we set out to the campuses, that we would not increase mandatory fees by more than 3%. I'm going to show you how that came out. Scroll down past that. Okay, so FY22 by campus, you can see, for instance, Montana State University, 2.3% for resident undergraduates. University of Montana, 3%. Montana Tech, 0. Billings, 2.7. MUS Northern, 3. And Western, I needed to come down to that, negative 1.7. So they're different across the board. None of them go over 3%. It's really a campus looking at the various fees they have, mindful of their fee balances, listening to the students. Again, that's another portion of our policy, that anytime we increase fees, students have a participatory role in that. And so this is, I guess, when we're looking at fees, your first decision point here, and our recommendation based upon the parameters that we gave the campus is that we believe campuses did a good job of following those recommendations.
Oh, please.
Thanks, Chair
Ken.
Grabowski. Just real quick question. Notice in the proposed fee hikes, why are we seeing a slightly higher fee hike for resident students than non-resident students on every campus except for Missoula?
Put that back up there.
2.3.
Those are going to be in, we charge an extra building fee to non-resident students. And so they're paying more of a fee, so their denominator is different. And then at the case of MSU here, they just would not be increasing that non-resident building fee, where just the opposite here is happening at the University of Montana. They actually are aligning the rate of non-resident building fees with MSU. I don't know if they used MSU or not, but it's getting close to MSU's rate. So that's the difference in the two there.
Thank you.
Okay, we have the 2-year campuses. They're going to largely, if they're embedded, follow what the campus are embedded in, direction they're headed. And then you see Great Falls College there at 0 across the board. Well, Islands went along with the main campus. Yeah, so same story, but now we're just looking at the mandatory fees and comparing it to the regional average. And we're gonna paint a little bit different picture here than tuition. And the fees in the Montana University system are, you could say, relatively higher than the WICHE average in most sectors. The MSU and U of M, you can see that the rates are between $300 and $400 higher per year. So this is the annual amount that we're paying per year. It's important, but I would argue not as important as when your tuition, which is a much higher bill to pay, is higher than the average, but it is something that we've been aware of. And in past years, we've recommended freezes to mandatory fees. And as the commissioner indicated, never in our collective memories have we gone above CPI. Now, sometimes we've allowed campuses to bring new mandatory fees to the board. At this juncture, it was our recommendation that we did not do that. And as a result, we have no new requests for mandatory fees here at this meeting. So
Madam Chair, I guess on that topic, I would simply say, in terms of where we go, I think this is an area that we need to look at. And, I would encourage you, a lot of work has went into getting to today. I'm supportive of the metrics that you have in front of you and approving those. But I think we've had some conversations and would like to interest in the board of really taking a comprehensive look. Fees are a little out of line, but more than that, they're a whole lot frustrating to a whole lot of families. It's just, you get kind of the bill and then this laundry list that follows. We did a bunch of work, as Deputy Commissioner Trevor said a few years back, to consolidate those down, so at least we can kind of compare apples to apples across the system. But now with that work done, I think we should look at a number of these. And I think we should ask the question, what are appropriate fees and what maybe is another word for tuition? And if they're tuition, should they be in the tuition bill? And that helps students compare. So that's really a project that we'd like to sort of undertake over the next year or so. And I think it's important to get this imbalance as well. And that may shift those relatively to each other some, but then that helps realign our overall target of how do we get toward that median household income.
Just for other regions, we did at the budget committee affirm and talk about and ask for that work and didn't try to define it, of course, but we talked about mandatory fees and then there's that other category of program fees. And so I really feel like if we can spend some time on that in the next year, that will be beneficial.
And Madam Chair,
Please.
So we wouldn't be able to kind of go through all these slides if we didn't do that work 2-3 years ago to have common language, common definitions for each of these fees, have it consistent across. And I think that's going to be critical. I mean, we had this conversation 5 years ago about we need to address and have some overarching vision or strategy from the board perspective of how we want to treat fees. And I think we're in that position now. But I'm just curious, is there any more data that we need to harmonize across in regards to fees across the system to be able to really dig deep into this conversation of what is our policy? What is our stance on fees?
Chair Dombrowski, Chair Lozar, I feel pretty comfortable with the mandatory fee categories. That was where we spent all of our time. I think there would be the alignment, I guess the analysis and questioning associated with program fees, which I'm going to talk to you about here in a minute. And then those course level fees. There's very little course level decisions that the regents are asked to make. Yet we have course level fees that we ask the regents to approve. And therein lies the problem, because I am then in charge with giving you a recommendation on individual course fees that I don't have the detailed information, nor could I gain to make a good recommendation. So I guess that's more of a 30,000-foot answer to your question. But at my initial look at this, I think that's an area we would look at.
Regent Sexton.
Thank you, Chair Dombrowski. Commissioner Trevor, whenever you do dive into the fee topic, I would appreciate some attention paid to the situation with online students versus students who are attending on campus. I know a lot of talk we had about that over this last year, and it didn't make sense to make changes in the middle of COVID, and I appreciate why we didn't. But you are dealing with a completely new type of student, and even if they're living within access to a campus, if they're taking all their classes online, they're very likely not using those resources that they're paying for. So I would really appreciate an analysis of how much they're using those, and because online students are already paying an additional fee to attend online, they're also then paying for these other services that they're not using. I think that's a kind of a shame. So I would appreciate a look at that.
Yep. Madam Chair, Regent Sexton, that is completely insightful, and that would have I remember back to a list I just made, and online is on there. I think we can fix some of the policy that we have too, that is that guiding us in terms of setting rates and then harmonizing the fees across the system. At the moment, it's it's understandable. It's compiled on top of 15 years of a growing modality of providing classes to students that 20 years ago doesn't look quite the same as it does right now, yet our policies could stand to be modernized as well to help guide our decisions. Yep, absolutely.
Thank you.
Good comment.
Madam Chair, I'll keep moving down. I restarted my mouse. I know the mouse was going to be such a topic. Okay, very similar look here. Again, stagnant pages from our dashboard. You'll see that now when we're in the mandatory fee comparison by state, we're no longer underneath the average, as you'd expect from the previous slides. There's the remainder of the states. That's at the doctoral flagship. Rather than provide the rest of the institutions, that sums it up. And then a similar chart here comparing Montana to the WICHE average. So with that, I can move on to that next category of fees called program fees. And we have set fees for individual programs that are professional in nature, high demand, have an extra cost associated with equipment or clinicals. Healthcare is an easy one to point to, but it varies by campus. And again, this would be something that I believe that we could look at over this next fiscal year as to why each one of these has a program fee. What's the justification behind it? Is there some sort of consistency we can get across the system? Our policy is very general on the statement of program fees. You'll see that by and large, these fees are not increasing. We didn't take new fees. Now I'm gonna take that back when I scroll to the next page, but you'll see that it's 0% increase at Tech. You get to Bozeman, it's largely zero, maybe a tick up at a few of them, 5% at nursing undergraduate. I would venture to guess they have a very substantiated reason for that. MSU Billings, you're seeing zeros across the board. University of Montana, we've talked a lot with the University of Montana about some of their professional graduate programs and the competitiveness of their pricing with regional institutions. And so you'll see some larger increases, for instance, in pharmacy, social work, law, and you'll also see that the variety of the different ways we present the charge per semester, per year, per credit makes it a little bit jagged there to analyze. And then down low, the last two, you have pharmacy and occupational therapy. Occupational therapy is a board-approved program coming online, I believe. And so they're setting that rate. It's understandable why I would have that there. And then the fourth year pharmacy, I did a lot of talking with the vice president of finance and the dean there about this program. And it's just evolved and changed as you'd expect curriculum to. It is clinical based, and this is deemed a worthy fee that needed to be put in place. So then Northern and Western, you see are at zeros. So that's the program fee area. I mentioned course fees, and I have the definition of what a course fee here is. They'd be charged for things like field trips, study abroad, specialized activities. That might be with like outdoor activity type We have pass-throughs, lab consumables. So you can imagine all the different categories and courses that might fit into this. I provided you some examples down there of what these course fees would look like. And getting our arms around that would be one of the goals of our upcoming year, to take a look when we look at the fees. We then have room and board. And so what we're building towards here is the cost of attendance. Tuition and fees plus room and board and some other miscellaneous charges gets you to the cost of attendance. And so we also wanted to look at room and board. I have two tables here for you. One in nominal dollars, one in constant. I believe the inflation adjusted numbers are probably the best way to look at this. We have a pretty long time series here and some inflation that's just starting to rise. When you look at it through the inflationary adjusted lens, you'll see that the increase that we're proposing for 22 is not large at all across our campuses. The annual growth has been low. And I think this is a reflection of campuses running their auxiliaries in a manner which is to keep them afloat, but keep the price down to the degree that we can. And that's in earnest. The conversations I've had with the CFOs, they are well aware of the rising need to provide these services to the students, compete with other campuses in an era where rooms look a little bit better maybe than when 1988 that I was there. So I give you a chance to kind of digest those rates as we then look to combining that tuition and fees plus room and board. I mentioned here that we also could add in textbooks, and that varies so widely that $1,500 you can see as an average, but it's just so program related that I left it off. And just to keep it clean, you can see the in constant dollars, the change in the cost of attendance from 2010 through what now will be 2023. MSU and U of M, closely followed by Montana Tech, our regional 4-year and our 2-year colleges. Just to finish these slides off real quick here, in cumulative percent change since 2007, you can take a look at what tuition and fees has done, 100% increase over time. And cumulatively, the growth at our campuses of tuition and fees, and then what higher education costs. You have a higher education price index, and you have a consumer price index down just directly below those. So I think this is just a slide to illustrate that we have in the Montana University system kept affordability as if not the top goal, very, very close to it. The national comparison, this is again just so you can get your cost of attendance gauge. You can look at 2-year campuses, and you have the tuition and fees in the dark blue. The light blue is room and board, and the various components that make up books and supplies, transportation, other expenses at 2-year and 4-year. And then down here in the gray box towards the left, I just do a little quick comparison there. See, I got a little typo there on my year on the national average, but that we are below the national average for our cost of attendance. And I believe books and supplies over there on the right, but don't dare try to increase the size.
Chair, those are Deputy Commissioner Trevor. What percentage of our students take advantage of the room and board offer by campus? Like, is it more than 50%? Again, it's a novice board member question, but
Madam Chair, Region Bow, no, it's closer to 30%. About a third of our students are going to be on campus in our dorms.
And a follow-up, are there campuses where there's a wait list, where there's a serious under capacity issue, or is it generally people making market choices about living off campus?
Madam Chair, Region Bow, it's different right now in our system by campus. I would say, without venturing into guess here, that Montana State University has some wait lists. Though I believe they're able to accommodate all their students, I guess that might be more specific to the dorm that they would wish to be in versus the dorms that might be open. We have, though, over time, I remember at the University of Montana, a dorm capacity issue and students sleeping in the lobbies. So it has varied. But at this point in time right now, I don't believe we're at capacity in the system.
Sexton.
Thank you, Chair Dombrowski. Deputy Commissioner Trevor, how closely does the room board in both Bozeman and Missoula track with the market prices? Because obviously, I mean, over the last year, those cost of rent and especially owning a home have gone up tremendously. So how much is that taken into consideration?
Madam Chair, Regent Sexton, I would use this as the national average right there for four-year campuses at 10,500. And I believe our campuses, without scrolling back up, we're right in that zone, maybe a little bit lower. Now that's all four-year campuses across the nation. So if you put them into the doctoral flagship category, we're going to be on the lower side.
Follow-up question, do you think there's going to be issues with capacity if rents keep going up in those areas?
Madam Chair, Regent Sexton, I'd imagine, I've read some newspaper articles on the amount of rent in Missoula, for instance. It's extreme.
Regent Buchanan.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Regent Dombrowski. So a couple of questions, because I think what I tend to struggle with this process of approving increases on our revenue side, we're out of context on the expenditure side. We're making that vote in September. So leading into that, a couple of things. From what I understand, I want to thank Deputy Commissioner Trevor for all the time he's given me in trying to understand the metrics of how we approve each of these percentage increase proposals. But two questions. As I've seen our overall funding trend over the last few years, congratulations to our staff and to our system for the great work you've done with the legislature and with the executive branch. We've righted that ship. But we've seen pretty dramatic decreases in revenue related to tuition, not because we're dropping tuition, but because we're not enrolling as many students as our campuses have built up capacity. So that's where I see the funding gap. I assume that's validated with the proposal in front of us, an increase in revenue from these. So that's a lens that I've been writing notes and thinking about. So a couple of questions. I really believe that our responsibility is to serve the resident students. I truly also believe that non-resident students subsidize the quality of the education on campuses, and they're a market of learners that we treat much differently than our resident students. So maybe for MSU and U of M, where the lion's share of non-resident students are, where are we relative to demand elasticity with our tuition? Are we at the peak? Can we charge more? If we were to charge less, could we drive more enrollment from non-resident students? The net revenue from non-resident students, to me, is something that I think this group should use as a tool to distribute across the entire system, our role as a system. We've got certainly differences on each campuses as it relates to these issues. And so we could get lost in discussions campus by campus, but our job is at the system level. So the question is, where are we with demand elasticity? And then the second question that I'm going to keep asking, and it's going to make it real hard for me to support a resident tuition hike, is as far as the capacity that we're funding, the budget that we're going to approve or look to approve in September, it appears to me that our capacity is much greater than what we're drawing from not only students, but the revenue associated with that enrollment. I don't know where this board has been on drawing that attention to campus leadership. I mean, if we're approving this and approving a budget without on the hope that enrollment's going to grow, I don't know if that's our fiduciary responsibility. I think our responsibility is to at least ask the question, where do we draw the line on continuing to fund this capacity that on many campuses is not being met and not being funded through the tuition that we get? So I think the specific question here, and I look forward to hearing from my colleagues because I've not been at the table in these discussions when we talk about tuition, revenue decline related to enrollment decline. Where are we in charging that non-resident student? Have we reached the price where we're deterring capturing that market? Are we well under it? Do we have room to grow it? Don't know if Deputy Commissioner Tyler is going to answer that, or if it's the campuses.
Madam Chair, Regent Buchanan, I'll start in on that. I'd go back to the slide that I have that compared resident tuition, non-resident tuition at U of M and MSU to the regional peers, and we're slightly above that average. So that's research doctoral campuses in the West. I think that's the best comparator that you could have for MSU and U of M. You got to be able to separate campuses by mission type and make those comparisons. So then take a look at our ability to continue to grow non-resident students at the rate we're at. And you have to add in at our discounting strategy, because it's different by campus. I can't really articulate it in terms of what those differences are. And I'm not saying that those differences are driving the difference in the enrollment of students either. But we've had one campus able to grow their non-resident student enrollment. And recently that's been smaller increases than it had been in the past, but it's still nevertheless able to capture those students. But I think there's more at play here than just what you see as the sticker price. Like, think about when you go to a car lot and it's the MSRP there, you're not necessarily going to pay that depending upon the lot that you're at. So to get to a more succinct answer, are we below market? No, I do not believe we're below the market. Are we grossly above to the point that we're losing students? Well, evidence at MSU would say that we're not. But then again, their strategy for discounting students and their ability to recruit is not to be taken for granted. That's a machine there. So I don't have the magic answer for you on those rates. Again, I would say this is an area that we have relied upon the expertise at those campuses, and it's worked well. Depending upon the campus that you're at right now. And that's sort of the answer for a lot of the questions that have been asked here. It depends on the campus. Your topic about the revenue and the increasing in the student decline, again, is very campus dependent. So when you look at us as a system, we might look like something completely different than when you analyze underneath the hood on each one of those campuses.
Don't we understand our responsibility to be the system? I mean, that's the question I struggle with. I mean, I appreciate the nuances between campuses, but right here, we're guided by a system's success.
Madam Chair, Regent Buchanan, we certainly are. I would say, though, in terms of pricing, that non-resident piece probably has more external inputs than anything else we do. And we rely heavily on, honestly, there's publicly traded companies in this space that optimize student enrollments. That's what they do. And they optimize it for various disciplines. I mean, it's quite involved, and it is an area where we spend a lot of time, energy, and resources to try to do exactly that, optimize not only their initial pricing strategy, but then those discount strategies. And campuses can actually, they can ask questions like, if we want X number of students in the fall, what would the pricing discount need to be to achieve those? And so, while it is campus specific, we have relied on the expertise that's out there to really help drive those decisions. And I think, honestly, MSU was first to that market in terms of really engaging a national vendor on how to optimize both the non-resident enrollment growth and pricing strategies. Subsequently, you've got U of M, Montana Tech, the other ones that really make up the bulk of our non-resident students, engaging similar companies to do the same thing. So it's our responsibility. I just think it's important to know where the information comes from in terms of help guiding that. And I think it's incredibly challenging, to be honest, to try and guess at a system level or even at a board table as to what those optimization schedules look like. So I think that we have to have that good data and that good feedback. So when they make proposals, I think everybody in Montana, from the legislature on down, fully understands we have tried for years to leverage non-resident students to the benefit of resident students. And I say that out loud. That's not something we've shied away from. We think that we have something to offer and that helps make the cost of attendance and the overall attainability for Montana students better. And that's something we've tried to leverage. I think when you put all those things together, that gets us to our pricing strategy. I think when you look at the enrollment piece, certainly an area where we've needed work on some campuses. And that has been an encouragement that's come not only from my office, but from this board over the years to say, how do we optimize that non-resident piece at all campuses? That's an area we put lots of pressure on. I think honestly that there's decent news on the horizon. I don't want to oversell that, but the demographic switch, honestly, from, this, we talk about this. When you and I served together way back when, we talked early on about the demographics and the switch in Montana and what that would do. And then, the Great Recession hit, and that sort of changed our numbers. And to some extent, it made us a little numb over the demographic realities that existed. But following, sort of full workforce post Great Recession, we really saw those demographic hits and in the thousands of students less coming out of high school than we once had. I think that the optimism that I see on the horizon is that those demographic numbers come back, and they come back fairly quickly, more quickly than they declined. We should see a pretty good rebound over the next 5 years. And we put on a tremendous amount of pressure to the other campuses that have non-resident subsidy opportunities to work that channel much harder than we have. So I think that helps drive the deficiency in tuition revenue, which you're spot on. That is a huge driver of this, and that needs to be a huge focus moving forward on how we build that revenue side of the house and not always look to the tuition side.
The only other lens I'd add is, do we, because this funding gap is so significant, what's the net revenue that we're going to generate with the tuition increase if we approve it? First biennium.
In the first biennium?
Across the board, if all of these,
$3 million.
that's just for the resident tuition.
Yeah.
Non-resident, we will be at 4 million. And so then you're freezing it's basically 4.5 million.
Total.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, the way I think about it is, if we are still funding by approving this capacity on campuses, yet we're only realizing FTE to this level, where have we been to suggest that another strategy might be to scale back capacity? I mean, is there a firm position from us? Because I don't think any one of us is comfortable coming to every one of these conversations and filling this funding gap by putting more expense, passing more cost onto resident students in the state. That is not a successful long-term strategy in this fight to keep education accessible and affordable for the residents of the state of Montana. So again, new to the board, and I'm very interested in our temperament. Where are we on that? Or is that an appropriate position? Do we message that if we don't see trend shift in the enrollment space that's telling us that we're going to close that gap? Do we then put pressure or mandate capacity constraint to meet that realistic revenue projection? I mean, again, these are big questions, but I'm going to be real reluctant to support a tuition increase for resident students without having at least a plan to not message to the community. We're comfortable in perpetuity running at this capacity, even though we're not holding us accountable to fill the butts and seats that funds that.
Madam Chair. Well, if I can respond to that, Madam Chair, the only thing I would say missing from that analysis, and I largely agree with the question that you're asking, but I do think you have to factor in some notion of consumer price index or higher ed price index. There is some growth associated with pay increases and other cost increases, from insurance to library resources, the rest, that have grown in that same period of time, that it's not purely a backfill. You're right. There's a portion of it that has been a backfill. But a lot of that backfill has been made up with state and non-resident tuition. The piece that you see in the fees and the rest is that one slide that Tyler showed you, was pretty steady with consumer price index or some other modest measurement of growth, which I don't view that as a backfill. That's all I'm saying. I think there's a part of it that is inherent growth in a healthy economy. And so we've tried to keep pace with that. We haven't done what many institutions have done, which is sort of answered all our prayers on the backs of students. And I think that continues to be the strategy. I largely agree with what you're saying. I just think there has to be a little room to fill in a normalized growth channel. And I think the charts would say that that's more similar to what we've done than a massive shift in terms of backfilling holes.
Thank you. Madam Chair. Yeah, so I was going to say something similar to what you mentioned, Clay. I think there's the affordability question that I think you're driving at here. I think we've had a strategy to lean on residents, to keep resident tuition low. But there's also the reality in higher education that the cost of delivery is changing. Just that the different modalities are changing, the complexities in the system are changing. You talk about insurance, you talk about the increase in the type of IT that is needed to deliver high quality education. Our interventions, since like the game, we've done a lot of these game changer things to really engage differently with students. What we've been trying to work on with particularly underserved communities where we're really spending more time with them, the cost of delivery is going up. And I think, I don't know if that fully justifies what the gap that you're talking about, but I think it's really important. I just reflect on the Apply Montana, for example. Granted, I know that's a system effort at OG, but it's engaging with all the campuses. But we never had anything like Apply Montana, and the cost associated with that is the cost of modernizing our system. And I think even at the course level, the campuses are sort of working through that process of how do we modernize? What are the costs associated with it? And I think the cost of delivery of high quality education is continuing to increase. So like we're grappling with that at the same time of trying to keep the tuition rates as low as we can for residents. That's been our strategy. So I think it's a way for us to really be as competitive as we can to reach that. What I think is our mission is delivering low cost, but really high quality education in the system. So there may be ways in which, OG can take a look at the specific ways in which we are modernizing, the specific ways in which the cost of delivery of high quality education is increasing to better understand that intersection between tuition and fees, capacity, as well as the delivery of the type of education that we want to deliver.
Regent Sexton.
Chair Dombrowski, Deputy Commissioner Trevor, kind of to the point on price elasticity of demand. I don't think you can know that at all, actually, because we're not operating in a normal market. There's nothing about this market that's like a normal functioning private market. I think it's going to be different for every student that you have in the system. So you have lots and lots and lots of subsidies. You have students who are taking advantage of scholarships. You have Pell Grants. I mean, you have all of these different pieces that are all working together. So my question would be, which of these different buckets of students are being the most affected by these increases, if at all? And which of the students are we looking to help protect from those increases, if that's what we're trying to do? So which of the residents of Montana can't access education without us being here? Who are they? Do we know who they are? And without knowing that, I would want to know that. I'm sorry. And before I would make a decision on how this is impacting them. And I'm sorry if this is a little bit vague, but we're looking at, we have non-resident students, we have our Pell Grant students, we have non-Pell Grant students. Some of these students can go elsewhere for their education. So who's really being impacted by this? How much will that really affect enrollment? I'd like to know a little bit about how previous increases affected enrollment. Did we see a drastic decrease? Did we see students who couldn't actively get education in this state? Because again, normally you'd be able, like you made the example of a car, sticker price on a car. We don't have anything like that. So could you, and I'm sorry if that's a little bit all over the place, but
Madam Chair, Regent Sexton, I really appreciate that and redirect me back on track, but let me wade into that a little bit. So who are we in the biggest sense protecting? It's the resident student, and Regent Buchanan is right on. We've done that. 7 out of the last 10 years have been a full tuition freeze for resident students. So in the year, 2 of those years when we didn't, we received a $12 million cut in state appropriations. So, and a couple of those campuses still froze tuition. So in my mind, we've done everything that this board could have done to freeze and keep resident tuition low. The 3rd year is the year we're talking about in FY23. So that's the first thing. Now, some campuses have been able to use non-resident tuition to backfill the lack of tuition revenue that they received either from the freeze or declining enrollment. I'd say one campus, MSU. The other campuses, and if we use U of M as an example, has reduced their expenditures by more than $15 million over that period of time. So we have not just kept the expenditures constant the entire time. So setting that aside, more specifically, what students do we know are most impacted? So let's go back to the governance structure of the MUS and the different types of campuses that we have. That's why we're structured like we are. We have the doctoral flagship campuses priced a little higher, the regional 4-year campuses, and then your open entry access 2-year campuses, where almost 75% of the students are low income. And so by nature, the template that we set out there for Montana residents gives students access choices. And we arguably have for the size of state, we have how many 2-year campuses, how many towns have 2-year, it's quite accessible. So that is already in play and in place. It doesn't mean that these price increases wouldn't affect that group or a low-income student attending a flagship campus. But in general, I think you should go back to thinking of that structure first. We have by purposely designed a system with open access and entry points through our 2-year campuses. We are unique in the nation in the fact that we have these embedded 2-year campus opportunities within every 4-year campus. So I don't know, I'll stop there, and I don't know what portion of your question I didn't answer.
To that, actually, so for me, the students I would be most worried about would be the students who would be deprived of an education from these increases. And I think if those students are protected through those programs, then what you're actually doing is you're trying to get some information out of prices, which we don't really have. And you're wanting to get some of that behavior and some of that information that you don't have otherwise by allowing students the choice of where they would start pursuing that education. And one other follow-up note is I'd also like to speak a little bit to, if we don't do these increases, the impact that's going to have on the quality of the programs within the degrees and within the campuses. And I'm assuming that's part of why we're doing this.
Madam Chair, Regent Sexton, we have a base plus model. That's how we present our budget to the legislature. That's how campuses budget, and that plus out of the base is called present law. And we spend the minute we leave here, Director Lyons enters into the process of calculating, and we'll bring those projections to you next May and what those increases are and what's the reasoning behind them. I mean, we could just talk about the rising cost of property insurance right now. That's part of our present law calculation. A pay plan that was instituted this year that has to be paid for in both years of the biennium. So there are real expenses inside of that, in addition to these individual programs keeping up with the Joneses. And that's part of higher education. It's the game that we play. And we're sitting here at the top, looking down at the various approaches that campuses within a system are taking.
That's an excellent wrap up, in my opinion. I think we're at slide 17 of 17 here, unless there's other questions. Please.
Great.
Please move
Let's
along.
go back to-
If your mouse will move.
I don't know, I probably won't. If someone takes me back to that agenda, that would be great. And then click on the state appropriations. If we didn't have enough to talk about, let's talk about the distribution of state appropriations. So this to me is really the wrap up of the legislative session. And I know we have all different components of our budget, but the ed unit funding in House Bill 2 as and combined with our pay plan really is the heart of what we're doing up there at the legislature. So I talked to you in March about a 4-step process, and I'm not going to go through that 4-step process in detail and try to do it on this screen without a mouse either. But I will say this, in step 1, we make sure that we understand the amount that comes out of House Bill 2. In step 2, we peel off various items that actually aren't part of the MUS budget, but have been put into our budget. Things like motorcycle safety training, things like graduate medical education for residencies across the state. So you got to kind of peel it back to get to a level that we know are the dollars that go to the campuses. And then we account for other funding sources that come from other bills that end up accumulating together to form the lump. And the pay plan is the first one here. And so we go through that, and that's all in the second year of the biennium. We also have a statutory appropriation that comes to us for about $2 million, and we add that in. And by the time we get done here, we go to step 4. And step 4 is what I wanted to make sure that you're aware of. We then take and have traditionally done, this is one of those decision points, is that $350,000 off of the lump for Regents priorities. Things like the central app. That's what's currently we're using those dollars for. And also we calculate the current year's allocation of performance funding and reduce the amount that we're going to allocate to campuses by the amount that is the unallocated, the residual amount of performance funding. So I guess we'll just use that slide to set up what are the next slides. And there's nothing worse than looking at a spreadsheet on a PowerPoint from about 30 yards away. So I'll just take you through the basics that occur here. On the upper slice of this, we look at FY21 actuals, and we have this by campus, and we have the base for the campus plus the amount of performance funding, and that comes up with the state appropriation that we're in this current year. We run 2 basic metrics for every campus, and that is how many state dollars did you get per resident student? And then what are your total revenue per all students? And we use these as guideposts, keeping in mind the difference in missions and for instance, a 2-year college versus a research doctoral campus has a different cost structure. And we look at the balance and the differences throughout the system. It's just by the nature of these being our benchmark metrics in our operating budget. We then shift into FY22. And what we do here is we peel off $15 million off the lump for performance funding, set it aside. And then we pick up the base from the previous year, thus the base plus portion of our budget. And we then go through various additions that we are directed to in House Bill 2. We get money for the legislative audits that we conduct. We allocate those across the system. We got money for new space, which is great. New buildings that came on. We got the state share of the operation and maintenance of those buildings to get us started. Those dollars get added to the campus base. We then take a look at, okay, what type of a year is this? The first year of the biennium is much different than the second year of the biennium. In this case, we actually have a reduction in state appropriations that we have to apply across all the campuses. And we did this through an equal reduction at all of the campuses based upon what percent of resident student FTE that campus has in the system. So for instance, if MSU has 39% of the resident students, they received 39% of the reduction. And the reduction is 1.6 million, although you'll see it's 2.6 million up here because we had to add in the amounts for audit and new space first, which by the time you get done with all this, you see it'll total out to a reduction of 1.6. We then take do we have any other money left? In this case, nope, the answer is no. So we just move all the way down the list. There's no pay plan. We do a little mechanics there with our statutory approach, and campuses have their base. We then run the performance funding model, which we know the answers to, which we'll talk to here in this next bit. And we add those to the campus, and there's your allocation. We run the metrics again, and we compare the differences, and we move to the next year. So just hang with me there until before you have any questions, because FY23 is where, okay, FY22, we had the reductions. FY23, moving to 23 with a present law adjustment of $8.5 million and a $2 million pay plan allocation. So we go back to the base from FY21 first, and that's the top line. And then we look to, are there any additions related to audit? No. Are there any new space? Yes, we add those in. Do we have any present law adjustments? So of that $8.5 million, 500,000 of it went to the new space. We have $8 million. Theoretically, could be applied all to present law, but we have to also balance that with another category called state support per resident student. And are there any imbalances that we're occurring in the system? So we recognize the need for both of those. In this case, we allocated $3 million to present law across the system, which is done based upon your percent of resident student FTE in the system. And the remainder of that, which is roughly, or is $5 million, we allocated where we have campuses below the average state support per resident student. And in this case, we have one campus, a large campus, Montana State University, which is below the average. We allocated $4.7 million to them to adjust their state support per resident student. It increased the dollars per student from FY21 to FY23 by 1,000. And they would still, after we did that, be below the average. But that we deemed as the balanced approach to present law and state support per resident student. Then we allocated the pay plan based upon 55 cents per hour. We did some more mechanical stuff with a statutory approach. We added it up. We don't know performance funding, so we just gave campuses, assuming that they would receive 100% of their performance funding allotment. And we have the distribution for FY23. That's all that happened there.
Shirley, our Deputy Commissioner Trevor. Excellent description. Thank you. I learned a lot, right?
Thanks. Madam Chair, Regent Bow, I appreciate that. Sometimes I feel like I'm talking to myself in a weird dream. Madam Chair, if there, we have a question.
Please. Thank you, Chair Dombrowski. Deputy Commissioner Trevor. Yes, it was an excellent presentation. Thank you. I'd like to speak, if you could, a little bit, or I'd like you to speak, if you could, please. How did we get to the point where we had to reallocate to Bozeman and why?
Madam Chair, Regent Sexton, how did we get to that point historically? There's been a dramatic change in enrollment in the university system and imbalance between campuses. And base plus allocations that have been used in the past weren't as fluid or didn't fluctuate at the speed that enrollment did. And we had campuses that had stressed budgets on where they had declining enrollment, and we ensured that their bases were upheld.
So
that's it in a nutshell.
So kind of speaking back to Regent Buchanan's point earlier about what should our system look like? What do we want it to look like in 10 years? Are we keeping that in mind in terms of other campuses? Do we want other campuses to get as large as they can? on the enrollment distribution.
Great question.
Madam Chair, Regent Sexton, I'd point you to, first off, a Regents policy that we developed 5 or 6 years ago that has to do with mission parameters. And it describes broadly what we expect our campuses to look like within those categories: research, doctoral, special focus, regional, 4-year, and your 2-year campuses. And so could we blanketly say across the system, we expect all of our campuses to grow to the extent that they possibly can? I don't think so. I think for the regionals 4-year campuses, for one, they are constrained by a smaller infrastructure to begin with, but we would expect them to have programs in niche areas and not have blanket offerings of general education in all areas. Whereas the definition of I keep calling it research, doctoral, or flagship campuses, that you do have the breadth of programs and that you have undergraduate general education that covers those areas, but then you specialize in certain things like engineering or healthcare. So there's no one answer to that we expect campuses just to grow. There was an era, certainly, that we were in 2000 to 2012 where that was kind of the case, and competition and growth. We've not been in that for the last 8 years. We've been more in a constricting type enrollment situation, which, as the commissioner indicated, I think we're on the cusp of coming out of there. We rely heavily on Montana residents at our campuses. That's we have 1, 2 campuses that are able to pick up non-resident students, but by and large, the rest of the campuses are based on Montana graduates, just like you'd want it to be. But when you're in that situation, you're very much dependent upon those high school graduates. And when they are down by 1,500 to 2,000 fewer high school graduates, and that occurs over a 4-year period of time, you completely unload a 4-year pipe at a 4-year campus. And we've been unloaded. Now we're 6 years into that. So, hallelujah, we're coming out of it, and let's see what happens this fall. And it'll be an interesting time to look at enrollment.
I just want to make sure that there's some awareness about what we're incentivizing the campuses to do.
Yeah.
And also just, the infrastructure that's being built that you mentioned to the fact that we sustained campuses that saw a decline. So I think we need to be really aware of again, infrastructure being built and support that will need to be continued to be supported. And just not saying we have that answer today, I'm not saying I know the answer, but I think it's something that should always just be in the back of all of our minds.
And Madam Chair, Regent Sexton, I think that's a great segue into the performance funding section of this, because that's where the regions have purposely spoken that we want to incentivize campuses more than just the input, more than just enrollment. And keep in mind, we don't run a formula based upon enrollment, although clearly enrollment has a play in how we allocate the dollars. But performance funding is that one area that you can point to and say, hey, here's an area where we are stating our values and we're connecting funding to it. So maybe this is a good time to.
Regent Nystuen has a question, and I think, I don't know if he's alerted Jared.
Yes. Good morning, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
Thank
Please.
you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Kim and I have been listening intently for the last hour and a half about all this good discussion, and I'm clearly of mind with the majority of you that are favorable towards a proposed tuition increases here. During Budget Committee, I mentioned that I'm not a big fan of seeing lots of increases in fees. I like the idea that perhaps we will rally around looking at what's really tuition should be charged as tuition and not just continue to layer in fees. I would support the fees today that are proposed, with the understanding that going forward that we continue to refine what's a fee that's appropriate to be charged. I really like Regent Sexton's comments about the online students should not be charged the fees that those that are on campus as appropriate. So let's look at those things. As we look forward here, the performance funding, again, I'm a big fan of that. I remember a couple of years ago, I asked Tyler, should we be putting more dollars at risk for doing that? And I remember Deputy Commissioner Trevor, you said, no, let's stay with what we've got. I'm a big fan of continuing the metrics. Let's not tweak those materially as we look forward here. I think we as the region should send a consistent message as we go forward here. Finally, I am very much in support of the tuition increases for the 3 community colleges. I put a lot of trust and confidence in those 21 elected trustees of those campuses to work with their CEOs and their finance people to continue to appropriately drive the revenue for those community colleges. So again, I know that that when you, from a percentage basis, the increase at Flathead Valley Community College seems higher than perhaps some of the others, but that really is a function of the new funding formula that came from the legislature and the math associated with that. As we look forward to September, I really would encourage us to take a hard look while we're talking the revenue side today in tuition and fees and state funding and some things like that. I think the battleground going forward is really going to be on what the cost to deliver this high quality education is going forward here. With housing prices, energy prices, everything going up in cost, especially the cost of labor. I think that there are risks that we're going to have in our budgets this next September as to what is really the appropriate level of expenses we're going to have to continue to have the staff to be able to provide the ancillary services, auxiliary services, everything going forward to continue to maintain this level of quality. I want to commend Deputy Commissioner Trevor, Shauna, Commissioner Christian, and everybody for the well thought out presentation today. My apologies for needing to move on to a family commitment. Feel free to call me later on today or text me. I don't expect that there'll be a tie vote that you need a 7th vote to do that, but you can text me and we'll see if I have cell coverage to join you if needed. With that, this has been a very good meeting. Again, I apologize that I'm not there with you in person today, but look forward to some robust discussion as we gather for a July planning meeting and as we move forward. So any questions or comments for me before I sign off?
It doesn't appear that way. Regent Nystuen, thank you so very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you all. Good luck with the rest of your meeting and we'll see you in July.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Okay, thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks, Bob.
So before we move on, I just taking a little time to kind of reflect on your question, Sexton, which is a great question about what do we want to be, essentially, what do we want our campuses to look like? And I know we're talking about, we're in the budget committee meeting right now, so we're talking about affordability, we're talking about costs, we're talking about expenditures and pay and trade-offs, et cetera. But I just wanted to pull us up a little bit higher and really think about what the Board of Regents have prioritized over the past 4 or 5 years, what the campuses have prioritized, and that is this program prioritization on the campuses, of really analyzing and assessing which programs are being utilized, which programs are really assisting the state in being competitive and being innovative. And, let's kind of reflect on some of the programs that we discussed yesterday in the ARSA committee. I mean, the campuses are doing just a next level of analysis about industry assessment on certain potential programs and what that's going to mean for the state of Montana and what that's going to mean for certain campuses. And I think, I have a lot of faith in the chief academic officers, their connections with industry, connections with Montana stakeholders, that they're in part are going to help us in sort of driving what we want our campuses to look like and what we want our system to be. And I think we've seen a lot of really, really positive change. Brock didn't show it yesterday, but you can look at just the number of programs that have been put in moratorium as we're sort of reevaluating what we want to be and what educational services we want to offer to students. So I just think that pairs well with this conversation about affordability and expenses, because I think we're here to deliver high quality education. We're a public university system and we're doing it for the state of Montana. And I think if we can continue to sort of have these discussions when we're looking at budget and looking at, what our graduates come out to be and do for the state of Montana, I think it needs to be constantly graded in our discussions, because I think that's ultimately going to set us up and our state up for success. So consider that.
There, yeah.
Let's talk about the budget.
It's a both and.
Yep.
It's a both and. Any other comments before we move to performance funding? Okay.
Okay, Marlis, can you pull up that performance funding? All right, great. So for those of you that have been on the board, you'll recognize this organization goals performance funding. They've held true since 2013. Increased degree productivity. We were part of Complete College America. We are a part of Complete College America. It set the groundwork and the framework for how we developed our performance funding metrics. Focus on the output as well as the input, pay for what we value. So the results, really the easiest way is to look over in red and see which campuses or what percents are below 100. And we've got 7 out of the, we have 7 campuses that are at a level less than their total eligible amount for performance funding. Again, we have the embedded 2-year campuses split out from the main campus. So we're really focused on, measurement at the 2-year campus level is what that means. And I would say this, there's valid concern that maybe the COVID year affected the metrics. I mean, I just want to address that straight up. And I would say that all of the metrics that we're going to talk about and that we used, I don't know how much we're going to talk about them or not, were measured prior to this fiscal year. And so degree production, the number of degrees was used 2021. The only metric that's ventured into this year was retention rates. And so what percent of students entered in fall 19 came back in fall 20. And I would say that 5 out of the 7 campuses that received a reduction in performance funding actually increased their retention rates. So I would say that I'd argue that it didn't have an effect. And that we should hold steady with our performance funding. If you previewed this presentation prior to this, you'll notice that each campus has a page and you can go through each line. And I've done this before with the board and kind of given you the 15-second status of each campus. I'm not sure there's an appetite to do that today. And we had talked yesterday possibly about a general review of performance funding at future meetings, and maybe that would be the appropriate time, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. Just a couple of comments. I would say that if COVID impacted everybody. So in my mind, it isn't a defense, and your retention, I mean, sort of an interesting metric. And second of all, I do think there was a conversation around performance funding and the metrics, and you can't change them a lot, but is there an opportunity to, Regent Sexton said it yesterday, and people don't really know what to do. So I just think there would be a good opportunity for us to look at the current ones and either reaffirm at some future meeting when it makes some sense, because that seemed to be.
Madam Chair, I look forward to the opportunity to dive into what our current metrics are, what some of the changes we made recently, and to elicit feedback from the board of what they feel might be improvements.
Thank you. Questions on performance funding?
Madam Chair.
Sorry, Chair,
Please.
thank you. Deputy Commissioner Trevor, I don't have a question and I won't take too much time here, but I just wanted to acknowledge a little bit about the difference that this current model has for each campus in terms of the percentage of their budget that it is. And so I'd like to at least look at the impact it's having on each campus and the equity of that at a later date. Does not have to be.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I guess, Madam Chair, just
Yes.
one observation, looking at looking at the results campus by campus. There's just there's some amazing things and really positive things in looking at this, particularly the retention rate during COVID is phenomenal for most of the campuses. There's a real inconsistency when we look at sort of the outcome on success, persistence, looking at a degrees award and retention for the underrepresented population or underserved population. And I think I've mentioned this several times, probably every spring, this same similar point, but I think there's an opportunity at the system level to really kind of focus in on the campuses that have seen really positive increases on persistence and success for our underserved students, and to take the time to really dive into what did they do? What were some of the interventions? What were some of the services that they provided that can transfer to some of the campuses where we've seen, in some cases, very sizable negative retention rates for our underserved community? So I guess maybe it's more of a prompt for Deputy Commissioner Tessman and his CAOs across the system, but to have those conversations. Certainly we can learn a lot about Montana 10 project, but if we're seeing in a COVID year some really positive things for our underrepresented students, let's figure out what they're doing and kind of apply that across the system.
Madam Chair, Regent Lozer, I'd add on, and again, I keep talking about these dashboards, but it really is amazing when you have this an 8-year data set like this of the metrics that the regions have identified as the most important. And I'm not, the slides here don't do it justice on our ability to analyze those trends. That's an incredible tool we have at our fingertips.
Thank you. Jim Buchanan?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Dombrowski. I couldn't agree more, Chair Lazar, that the Montana 10 program is exciting. I would ask that we get as comprehensive as a review of outcomes that we can get, because it seems to have a lot of success we can leverage. The student connection piece in particular seems to really be working. So those investments, we might need to rethink the way we invest in resident students if it's that successful. And I do want to pick up on one thing. You responded, Deputy Commissioner Trevor, to Regent Sexton's question about institutional niches and roles and differentiation. And, again, I've shared as we talk in the budget committee about curricular strategies, delivery strategies. I firmly believe that one risk in interpreting this budget is we're still trying to create 16 institutions offering everything for everybody, right? And so this institutional niche, I don't know what mechanism we could put in place to evaluate, are we governing that hard enough? Or are we keenly staying focused? Because you said that as if that is our priority. That was a priority that we surfaced 15 years ago. How do we measure our success in aligning our decisions at the budget committee if that is the outcome we're looking for? So I don't know how to do that, but I would ask that we come up with a mechanism so that as we sit here, if that is the will of OCHE and of the board, we're aligning even the budget decisions with that strategic outcome we're desiring to get. So I couldn't agree more with that as a goal. Are our decisions aligned with that would be the question.
Madam Chair, Regent Buchanan, that similar question was posed, and I don't know if it was Regent Johnstone, maybe Regent Sheehy, 2016. I remember a governance presentation, and then we went through the primary degrees that are awarded by campus initially, just to give you a visual view of the different niches that our campuses do have. I mean, I think that's one place to start because it's just extremely interesting to see that and to see the themes that are developed. In our 2-year, there was a 2-year commission commissioned by the legislature last biennium, and Deputy Commissioner Tessman and I did a lot of presentations to them, and the different niches even within our 2-year campuses based upon their degree offerings are at least a starting point to getting an understanding of where we're at currently and maybe where we could improve.
But yeah.
I'll just add to that as well that, you know, as we're reviewing these request plan proposals in the ARS committee, that's one of the things that we're specifically looking at. And in our like level 1 memos, it's actually laid out in the OG staff's analysis of the course as well, which I think is helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Regent Sexton.
Chair Dombrowski, I just really want to echo Regent Buchanan's comment that I just support us being as proactive as possible rather than reactive. And obviously, you know, we don't have perfect vision of the future. So clearly things will come up that we're not expecting, but you know, are we pretty sure of where we're going? Have there been a fair amount of unexpected events along the way? Have we had to readjust? Have we had to readjust a lot? And if we have, I would like to look at why and how can we prevent that in the future? And so I wholeheartedly support just a closer look at, you know, how is that truly working? Are our outcomes aligning with what our goals are and what we've planned our goals to be? And also, I just wanted to say thank you so much for all of your help and answering all of my questions.
I don't know where you answer.
I know.
Challenging.
I've really enjoyed it, and I'm really appreciative, and I hope that that's reflective in what I'm saying today. It's my interest is also a compliment. So anyway, thanks for all of everything you've done.
All right, excellent. We've gotten through A.
We're going to pick up the speed.
Thank you.
I really appreciate the conversation, the questions, certainly. So I'll turn it back to you, Deputy Commissioner Trevor, to maybe go to B and lead us through.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe the best way to do this would be if we group B, C, and D, and I handed it off to Director Lyons just to quickly summarize the rate increases by resident undergraduate students that they're being proposed at our community colleges. I will mention this: Flathead Valley Community College and Dawson Community College come annually to the Board of Regents for tuition approval, where Miles is on a biennial approval. Take it away.
Madam Chair, members of the board, bringing to you items B, C, and D from the action for the community college tuition and mandatory fee increases. As Tyler mentioned, Flathead and Dawson bring these annually, so you'll get to see them again in May if they choose to bring tuition increases. And then Miles is on a biennial. So when we look at Dawson this coming fiscal year, they're looking at a 2.7% increase to their resident tuition and tuition. Flathead Valley is roughly 6.6%. And then Miles City for the first year is 3.3% on their resident increases. They do have their other tuition components as well for their WUI, their out of district, which is their non-resident, and their different categories as well. But those are their main primary resident tuition increases that they're proposing. As a note as well, all three of the community colleges have taken these forward to their local board of trustees, and they've been approved by them as well.
Questions? Okay, thank you.
All right. Or Madam Chair, I would ask Director Muffick to take us through this item.
All right. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Action item E is a request for authorization and approval to proceed with infrastructure projects authorized by the 67th legislature. This item really is a culmination of our long-range building program priorities, and it's a request for the board to approve the projects that went through the legislative session. Projects are included in House Bill 5, House Bill 14, and House Bill 632, and they're all referenced in the item. As Deputy Commissioner Trevor spoke to yesterday during the legislative update, we had a really good session. We received significant funding, more funding than we've had in any session. I won't go into that level of detail here. But the funding is divided up into funding and authority into three different sections: the capital development funding, the major repair funding, and spending authority. And this item has three attachments that provide the details for those. Maybe we could click on the capital development one just to kind of give you an example, and I'll give you some quick facts on it. While she's getting that figured out. So capital development, we have 53.52 million in projects. Forestry and Conservation Building at U of M was 25 million of that. Block Hall at Western, 12 million. The Mays Wool and Research Labs, 11 million. The greenhouses from last session that did not get completed because of cost increases were added in there for another 2 million. And then Montana Tech steam system upgrades. That's 3.52 million in capital development. The total project for the Montana Tech steam tunnel upgrades is 6 million. It's got another 2.48 that comes out of major repairs. So in addition to the capital development, as I mentioned, major repairs is something that we really saw a significant increase. Deputy Commissioner Trevor mentioned yesterday. In the past two sessions, we received 4.55 million and 3 million to handle deferred maintenance. We received 19.65 million in major repairs this session. 19 different projects from across the system, ranging from roof repairs to heating, ventilation, fire alarms, life and safety and health projects. I put that in some kind of perspective. Statewide, there was 26.7 million available for major repairs, and we received 74% of those funds. I chalk that up to the good work done by our campuses in prioritizing the projects, being able to provide the detail and the need to our partners over at the Architecture and Engineering Division, and which is part of the executive branch that prioritizes these projects. Then we have the authority only projects, and authority only, this is 68.3 million in authorities. It includes matches from the forestry, which is 20 million, and from the Maze Labs, which is 1.3 million. There's 9 different authorities included. And again, these are projects that don't require an appropriation from the state. Funding is either private or non-state funds, but we do need legislative authority to move forward. And finally, on this item, the item also authorizes the commissioner to move forward. I think this is in the last sentence, to move forward with projects, prioritizing and submitting them to the state for additional federal ARPA funds based on requirements that are set forth in House Bill 632. We have another item, an information item later on that provides a little bit more detail about the commissions that were set up by the state and the process that we'll be going through for the wastewater projects and the capital development projects. I can cover that in a little more detail then. That ends my report. I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions? I always appreciate your knowledge of all of that.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, with your permission to move on to item F, and we'll test Director Muffick's knowledge on this one as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Item F is a request for authorization to remodel Knowles Hall at the University of Montana in Missoula. This item is related to the Student Services Master Plan. You may recall you received an update from Vice President Paul Lassiter in March. He provided all the details on the plans that are included in the master plan to upgrade the student services on the campus. This item's in action rather than on the consent agenda because of the scope of it. It's $12 million. And also because it is an auxiliary facility. It's a facility that generates its own revenue. The Montana Code provides the board the authority to authorize revenue generating facilities without legislative approval. And that's typically your residence halls and your dining halls. So again, it's $12 million. Knowles Hall is a residence hall. Its current configuration can house 266 students. It's 4 floors plus a basement, total of about 58,000 square feet. It's built in 1963. The renovation will completely modernize the facility with room finishes, furniture, mechanical, electrical, IT, plumbing, elevator upgrades, and it will reconfigure some balconies and student lounges. It's going to retire a significant amount of deferred maintenance, and it's also replacing the roof. Renovation will result in 254 beds and a faculty in residence apartment. Funding from the project is from revenue bonds, the proceeds from there, as well as some auxiliary renewal and replacement funds. Stand for any questions, Madam Chair.
Seeing no questions?
All right, Madam Chair, I believe it's item G. Request for authorization to construct a new dining facility at the U of M. This also part of the Student Services Master Plan. Will result in a modern student-focused restaurant-style dining. Attachment 1 details the campus population that will be served by this facility, the number of meals, et cetera. Construction also includes some partial demolition of Craig Hall and the Lomason Center to make room for this facility. There's a map as an attachment. Maybe we could pull up that map, Marlis, so people can understand where this facility is going to be located. So the facility will be larger than the current facility. For example, the facility will provide 710 indoor seats, 75 outdoor seats, and compared to the current food zoo, which provides 490 seats. So a significant increase in capacity, in addition to a much more updated, modernization of the student experience. It's estimated to be about 44,000 square feet. Of note, for the Student Services Master Plan, that this project, as well as the wayfinding project that was on the consent agenda and the Knowles Hall, I think it's important to note that the plan has been endorsed by the Associated Students of the University of Montana, so the student government. Lomason Hall, the piece of Lomason Hall that's be demolished, you may recall last meeting we approved Aber Hall, the remodel of that. That's where displaced services from Lomason will be moved is to Aber Hall. So stand for any questions, and Vice President Lassiter is also available for any questions, Madam Chair.
Questions? Okay. Please.
Madam Chair, the next item, if we bring up the agenda here, Marlis is earning her there. Item H, request for authorization to amend the bond indenture for MSU. This, a little bit of background on this. I also have Vice President Terry Least on the line here that help out with some details if the board has some questions. This really is just exactly what the title says, is to update and modernize the indenture as it relates to MSU's bonding agreements. It is to broaden that scope rather and update it from what is now a rather narrow approach. Also key to what they are doing is this brings their indenture sort of in line with what we've already approved for the University of Montana. Connected to this request is also approvals that this board has already given to MSU to refund a significant portion of their debt, up to 139 million. That was back in March, and then the COVID hit, and we, well, rates were crazy, and they've held off. So they would use this new indenture to refund a portion of their portfolio, as well as extend out for a new revenue bond for an item that you approved in September, which was the Wellness Center, and that is up to $24 million in bonding. Madam Chair, stand for any questions and look to Vice President Least to see if he has any further comments.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Trevor and Madam Chair, members of the board. Yeah, I stand for any questions. I think Deputy Commissioner explained that fairly well. In essence, this will simplify and modernize our indenture so that bondholders can more easily understand our financial disclosures, et cetera, and will also provide a more streamlined and easy to understand approach to our pledged revenue stream. So we have worked with our financial advisors as well as Dorsey and Whitney for bond counsel. Everybody's been through this in great detail. These pledged revenues will not include tuition or the 6 mil levy or any other restricted funds. So you know, again, this is something that many universities across the country have undertaken, and as was mentioned, University of Montana did in 2019. So we'll stand for any further specific questions if you have those. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
Chair Dombrowski, Terry, just a question. What's your expected savings on the refinancing, and when do you think that will be accomplished?
The refinancing has, let me see if I can, I'm sorry, Madam Chair and Regent Bao. The savings on this is somewhere in the 6 or something percent. It's over 6% total. I don't have the exact dollar amount at this point. $5 to $6 million is what I'm being told. Yeah, thank you.
And is that expected to happen in 2021?
Yes, yeah, we, at this point, we're kind of waiting. The Student Wellness Center, we will not need the funds for that until this upcoming year. So that's why one of the reasons we've been delaying. So the markets went crazy after the initial pandemic hit. And then as we started planning out the Student Wellness Center and looking for the debt there, trying to postpone that as long as possible to save interest expense for the students. So we will combine the refunding as well as the new issuance together, and plan to do that maybe as soon as this summer, August, if the markets are in our favor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Powell. Any other questions, comments? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Madam Chair, if we go back to the agenda here and almost there. All right, item I, that would be Director Lyons.
Madam Chair, members of the board, I'm going to bring to you today the request for spending authority for the latest round of COVID relief funds. So as a reminder, this is our third round of funding that we've received. The board has previously approved the other 2 rounds of CARES and CRISA Act funding. So in March, the Congress passed the American Rescue Plan. It was approved to provide $74 million in what's called higher education relief funds to the Montana University system. So that's what we're going to talk about today. As with all of the rounds for these HERF dollars, they come with great guidelines and guidance and allowable uses that we need to follow, primarily around the fact that these have to be related to COVID. These are not just open dollars for us to do whatever we want to, not just for revenue backfill, fixing things that we want to fix. They've got very specific guidelines, and we are monitoring those and making sure that we're following that guidance. When we talk about the HERF funds, it's split into 2 primary buckets. You've got your institutional side and then your student emergency grant portion of it. The Department of Education has changed that allocation every round with how much goes to the students, how much goes to the institutions. This time, you'll see it's not quite a 50-50 split. There's a little bit more that's going to the students on this aspect of the $74 million. With that, the student side of it, that guidance has stayed fairly consistent, but this time they've really put some focus and emphasis on the fact that they want to encourage and emphasize and try to get most of the funds out to those students that really need it. So we're talking about those Pell eligible students, maybe those students that are hitting some unforeseen circumstances right now, unemployment, maybe their parent has now unemployed as well. And so providing those grants to those students for those aspects. When we talk about the institutional side of the funds, this is where it gets a lot trickier. With each round of the funding, there's been different guidance along the way and what we've been allowed to use those funds on. So let's go back to the first round with CARES funding. We were able to use those dollars to refund those students that had to leave our residence halls, so our room and board refunds. And then we could use the remaining of those institutional funds to help transition all of our students to remote learning. So buying all that technology, providing the network and the services to our students in order to stay in classes and able to complete and hopefully meet our performance metrics that we just talked about. In round 2 of the funding with the CRISA funds, the guidance changed again, opened it up a little bit more, but not entirely. Round 2 really allowed us to move on into continuing that efforts of mitigation and monitoring for COVID, social distancing, making sure that we provided the resources to our students for social and mental health, staying safe in our residence halls, in our classrooms, and making those adjustments to keep those students attending school and safe while they were on our campuses, along with continue increasing our remote learning technologies, providing the resources to the students, the faculty and staff, again, to keep our students on campuses while they're facing the pandemic. So round 3 changes just slightly. All of the other requirements and allowed uses are still in place. So we can still help mitigate and monitor COVID-19. We can still increase our resources for remote learning and technologies from that side of it. We're continuing to defray those expenses that are related to COVID. So purchasing additional PPE, enhanced cleaning, those aspects of it. One difference this time though, is that they are really focusing on making sure that we're spending some of these dollars to do outreach to our students so that they know there's money out there for them to get these student emergency grants. The other aspect that I'm sure a lot of you have heard about is the lost revenue piece of it. This is new within this round of funding, but it also comes with additional guidelines and sideboards with these dollars. It's not just a free for all. Again, we have to make sure that our campuses are following the guidance that it has to be a lost revenue due to COVID, not just because enrollments are declining or whatever it may be. We have to validate and provide methodologies that prove that the funds that we're using for lost revenue are actually related back to COVID. So take, for example, residence halls, we just talked about room and board. Regent Sexton's asked about, what is our capacity in that? One of the things that our campuses has done in order to maintain some of that social distancing has decreased the amount of students that we put per room. So on an average year, if we had 2 students per room, but now the campus decision due to COVID is to only have 1 student per room, that lost revenue from having 1 less student in a room could be considered as lost revenue resources towards these funds and be an allowed use. When we're talking about the enrollment side of it, we really need to ensure that if we're utilizing it to backfill any tuition for lost enrollment, that enrollment decline is truly related to COVID issues, not just because our enrollment might be declining in certain areas. So you can see there's a chart up there by campus, what each campus is receiving broke down by their student and their emergency, or by their student emergency grant side and their institutional portions. There are a couple other pieces that will be coming to the campuses for our minority serving institutions, our strengthening institutions. Those guidelines are very much in line with the institutional side of these dollars. In addition to, the campuses can take, if they don't want to spend all their institutional dollars on defraying expenses or lost revenue, can add more funding to the student emergency grant side as well. I've also provided today, just so that everybody has it, a synopsis of all of the levels of COVID relief funding that we've received since this all began last March. So that's available for you as well. I'm not going to go into those details, but happy to answer any questions that you may have today.
Regent Sexton.
Chair Dombrowski. My only question is, how long do the campuses and does the system have to spend these funds?
Great question. That's been one of the greatest changes for us. So originally when we got CARES funding, they had 18 months from the date of start. What they've decided to do is that once we start drawing down this 3rd round of funding, it resets the clock on all of the remaining funds that are out there. So if we had any CARES fund left over, we now get 12 months from the date of when we start drawing down our ARPA funds moving forward.
Thank you, that's great.
Other questions? I just have a comment. Deputy Commissioner Trevor, you and I had this conversation early on, and Sean, I really appreciate the level of detail because I just think there's so much scrutiny of $78 million coming in and where's the accountability and where are the guidelines. So thanks for the detailed work. And of course, it couldn't make it any more complex. And now we've got to roll it through. And I really appreciate that. And thank you for that work. Regent Rogers.
Thank you so much. And I'm not sure if this is a question for you, Director Lands, or you, Deputy Commissioner Trevor. Can you just give me a quick rundown of all the ARPA funds that we're getting one more time?
Sure. Actually, we have a chart, another attachment there. All ARPA funds are all COVID-related federal funding buckets that we've received since the beginning.
Just ARPA.
Well, just ARPA. So the higher education relief funds would be a vast majority of the funding. In House Bill 632, we talked about, we received $12 million, $5 million for major repairs, and $7 million roughly for UM Block Hall.
Yep.
So unless those two on that side of the table correct me, I'm going to go 12 million plus 74 million would be the total amount of our ARPA funding.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
74, right?
86.
Yeah.
90.
Great question, actually. Thank you. Any other on this? Again, thank you for that detail.
Yeah, thank you.
Great.
One more item. Jay. Director Lyons again.
Thank God for
The next item that I'd like to bring to you, Madam Chair, and the members of the board is the distribution of our timber sales revenue. This is kind of a unique one every other year in May. It's why it adds to the long agenda in our May meeting every other year, is what do we do with the distributable revenue from one of our university trusts? It's interesting, we have several trusts, but this is the only one that is distributable revenue, and that is why it's brought to the board so that you can say whether or not you want to put it back into the trust or if we want the campuses to utilize it. The campuses can use this for repayment of debt. So kind of following up with the bond indenture, if the campuses wanted to utilize it towards part of their overall repayment process, it's an applicable use of it. If there's any chronic negative fund balances or for some deferred maintenance, that's not as an ongoing basis. And so today we're bringing forward to you to approve roughly $1.2 million to distribute back into the campuses. There's an attachment in there. If you wanted to look, you could see by campus what they were receiving or what they have received. We don't have the official revenue for 22 and 23, but it should be pretty well on par with what it's been. The other attachment that's on there, attachment 3, if Marlis wouldn't mind going to that, please, just to give the board an idea of kind of the over-compassing part of this. Today, we're only bringing the timber sales, but as you look at the activity for the overall university trust, you can see there's a lot of different trusts out there. These are non-distributable revenues. They go right back into the trust itself. And then the campuses do get some interest off of them. But timber sales is a very small percentage of what is actually brought forward to the board. But again, wanting you to see what all is out there for the campuses as well. And I will stand for questions.
I have one question. Has it generally been voted on to distribute this back to the campuses? Has that been that? Okay,
Chair Dombrowski,
please.
just a question, Director. How's the distribution, what's the formula for distribution? Not in detail, but just, is it based on enrollment or amount of debt outstanding?
It's federal regulations based on how they can distribute any of the sales of the timber products that they've had out there. So it's broke down.
If there's a dollar amount going to MSU and a dollar amount going to.
What institution owns the trust lands?
It's based on our trust lands.
Madam Chair, sorry.
We're past that.
I do the quick answer.
Any other questions? Well, really, that concludes the action items for discussion in this committee. We do have some information items, and I'll turn it back to you, Deputy Commissioner.
Madam Chair, just reading the committee and the remainder and rest of the board, I'm going to summarize the information items without opening any of them. Enrollment report, we have, this used to be like shooting something through a cannon. Now it is dynamic. It's updated often. This is the fiscal year enrollment report. It's a dashboard, actually in a storyboard that you can read along with, that has some general analysis that goes with it. But in this new era of dashboards and information on our website, this is completely transparent and accessible to anyone all the time. Item B is a ARPA commission update. And so as we know from the legislative session, House Bill 632, there will be 4 commissions that are going to meet during the interim. One that gets a lot of attention, and our attention, of course, is the Infrastructure Commission, focus on water and sewage, also a focus on just capital improvements. We are, I guess the message we want to convey here is that we're in touch with architecture and engineering, the governor's office, and any other avenue that might come to us here at OCHI to participate in these commissions. And so any information submitted to the commissions that might be a funding request will come from OCHI to the commissions. And then finally, this is one of these biennial policy, it could be annual, that we bring to the board, which is an update on what you heard Director Muffick talk about, our spending authority, our projects, and the authority that we've given to campuses and a tracking of those projects. And so these attachments do just that. And I'm sure that Director Muffet could answer questions on that if there were any, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any questions for anyone? Please, Regent Buchanan.
I just would ask everyone around the table, if you take a minute to open the enrollment slide, I think it's some telling data there. Can't overlook that total enrollment since 2013 is down 17%, resident enrollment 25%. These are real data metrics, back to the point about the capacity we're choosing to fund. I appreciate very much the focus on getting through the agenda item, but I've been looking at that slide for 2.5 weeks as we prepared for this, and it's a crux of a lot of the questions that I've been trying to grapple with. So Deputy Commissioner Trevor, thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you, Regent Buchanan. I couldn't agree more. It really, and I appreciate the dynamicness because it did used to be, I don't know, once a quarter on the 15th, and then sometimes it changed. I mean, it was, so this is so much more helpful. Not necessarily good news at the moment.
It's a challenge. We have to address it. We have to.
Okay, if there are no further comments, the Budget Committee report is complete.
Excellent. Way to run a good committee, and thank you all for lots of your preparation for the committee meeting. I think we're due a break. It's 11 o'clock. Let's come back at about 11:10, and we'll dive into public comment. So we'll come back at 11:10. All right, we're going to go back live. Welcome back to the last part of the May meeting. We've reached the point on the agenda. We're going to open it up to public comments. Just note before passing it over to Amy to kind of walk through how this will work, the virtual platform. We appreciate everyone's public comment and ask that we keep public comment to about 90 seconds or so. So I'll pass it over to you, Amy.
Just as yesterday, this meeting is still open to the public electronically, so anyone wishing to provide public comment, this is the best time to do so. For those joining by phone, you can see the number listed on the screen as well as meeting ID. For those joined via Zoom, please go ahead and use the raise your hand button featured at the bottom of your screen to indicate that you wish to give public comment. As hands go up here and we start to work through the list, I as your host will lower your hands and ask you to unmute. Once you're unmuted, please state your full name for the record and proceed with your comments. As Chair Lozar noted, in the interest of time, we will have a timer set up for 90 seconds to help keep everybody on track. Comments can also be submitted in writing to myself via email at aunsworth@montana.edu. Those comments will be shared with members of the board and included as part of our official record.
Excellent. Thank you, Amy. Amy, is there any public comment?
I do have two hands up. Go in here. Jack, feel free, please.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yep, can.
Awesome. Well, hello, Chair Lozar, members of the board. I hope you're doing well. My name is Jack Rink, that's R-I-N-C-K, and I'm currently serving as the business manager for the Associated Students of the University of Montana. So I come before you today to comment on the Curry Health Center and Student Advocacy Resource Center, also known as SARC, fee segregation. So unfortunately, the segregation of the SARC fee from the Curry Health Center fee was not granted a place on this Board of Regents meeting agenda, but you know, the level of student support and the importance of this warrants a few comments. I guess I wouldn't be doing my position justice as a servant of students. So first, I'll just add that in March of 2021, the ASUM Senate voted in favor of Senate Bill 74, titled a resolution supporting the segregation of funds for the Student Advocacy Resource Center, and this resolution passed with overwhelming support. Additionally, within ASUM, the Title IX Ad Hoc Committee put together a comprehensive and quite splendid report, I must say, parts of which outline the importance for sustainable funding for the Student Advocacy Resource Center and Curry Health Center, but in a separate fashion. And you know, with my remaining time, I'll just comment that these two services provided an immeasurably valuable service to students amidst the pandemic. And, you know, I realize it didn't show up because it would be technically qualified as a new fee, but it really is just a segregation of these two fees. You know, so with that, I just simply wanted to bring this request to y'all's attention if you were unaware, and I'll happily continue to be an advocate for this in the future. And, you know, thank you for your service.
Thank you, Jack. Any additional public comment?
There is. Cannon, feel free.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can.
My name is Kenyon Locke, and I'm the Vice President of the Associated Students of the University of Montana. Thank you for providing this public the opportunity to voice their desires and concerns for the Montana University system. And thank you also for all of your hard work this month. So like Jack, I'm using my time today to amplify on behalf of University of Montana students, the need for a proposed fee. In my instance, it would be a fee in support of BIPOC students and cultural groups. Such a fee proposal was drafted by an ASUM senator by the name of Isaac La'a and passed with a monumental 85% student support during our ASUM spring elections. As proposed, the fee would be opt-out and no students would be obliged to pay it if they can't afford it or otherwise choose not to do so. So I understand that as a board, you've been charged with navigating the ship of the MUS through an unprecedented and turbulent year, and sincerely congratulate you for having done so with equivalent courage and efficacy. Now, however, as the pandemic recedes and students can look forward to a year of comparatively little tribulations, I ask that you consider which students remain at an inherent disadvantage. The state of Montana has an unfortunate, long, and sad history of oppression directed at BIPOC individuals and groups, which might be partially remedied for students in the university system through supplemental monetary support for cultural groups. Please consider such an action the next time fees are on the table. Thank you, and I respectfully yield.
Any additional public comments?
There is.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Just a second. So aloha and good morning to Commissioner Christian and all the regents. My name is Isaac La'a, LAA, and I am a non-traditional senior at UM studying Management Information Systems. I'm a combat veteran, senator for ASUM, and a treasurer for the Pacific Islanders Club. My public comment today is in reference to Senate Bill 69, which is a resolution that I authored regarding ballot language for the introduction of a fee supporting Black, Indigenous, and people of color, BIPOC, and racial or ethnic student groups. I wrote this bill seeking an opt-out $5 fee per semester starting in fall 2021 to help maintain ongoing events and create new programming for students at UM. At a time when BIPOC students continue to face discrimination, systemic racism, and substantial underfunding, some of the student groups that continued to do outreach during this pandemic included Kiayo Native American Student Association, Black Student Union, Latinx Student Union, and Pacific Islanders Club. These student groups continue to share their traditional cultures and language via Zoom and social media platforms, which allows students and community members to stay engaged during a time of uncertainty. I've personally been at UM and Missoula College since 2015. I took a few breaks in between. However, my higher education success is contributed through the support of a few administrators, faculty, staff, and fellow BIPOC students. Co-teaching and practicing my Hawaiian culture at a predominantly white institution empowers me and those that are eager to learn during our weekly classes. Back in November of 2018, student representatives from Kiayo Native American Student Association and Pacific Islanders Club shared their traditional cultures with attendees at a reception in the Payne Family Native American Center. I believe Commissioner Christian and Chair Lozar was present during that reception, and attendees couldn't stop expressing how happy they were to witness such an amazing collaboration between both student groups. In closing, I wanted to mention that ASUM did pass this resolution on March 17th, which allowed students to vote during the April 14th and 15th spring ASUM elections. The student body passed this fee proposal. Therefore, I'm asking for your support to pass Senate Bill 69. Thank you.
Thank you, Isaac. Any additional public comment?
There is. Thank you. We're getting our next person started here. I apologize. I do not know how to pronounce your name.
That's okay. I'll say that for you all. Aloha, everyone. My name is Ka'au Moana Ahina, last name Ahina, and I am the president of the University of Montana Pacific Islanders Club. I'm also an intern for Montana 10 program here at the University of Montana, and also served as the Diverse U student coordinator for the University of Montana. I'm so happy to be here today to speak to all of you, and thank you all for this time. I am asking for your support as all the regents listen to the SB 69 resolution that was put out by Senator Isaac La'a. As much as I'm a senior this year, and I am hoping that this would be on the top of all of your lists, as our students, including myself, have worked so hard to advocate and for inclusion, for equity, and for diversity on the campus of University of Montana. Our programming, our excitement, our retention for all of our students have been able to build each and every week through this pandemic, through the semesters that have gone on this year. We ask that you please look at this SB 69 and put that on top of your list for us students. This resolution and bill was passed in March and was voted 990 votes within, which is the top voting percentage of all of the bills that were written out in March. I ask and humbly ask all of you to please put that on top of your list. Thank you so much for your time, and aloha to all of you.
Thank you. Thank you for your public comment. Public comment.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. Well, thank you for having me. My name is Noah Durnell. I'm the president of the Associated Students of the University of Montana. I'm also the outgoing president of our Student Music Union. It's an honor today to represent the voice of students by voicing their support for the arts and culture fee. This is a new fee proposal by our university. It's a $25 annual fee. If implemented, it proposes a lot of benefits to our student body. First, our arts and culture programming would improve. With such a minuscule budget right now, the UM has still been able to program in a way that is competitive with other schools around the nation, and this is bound to improve. Secondly, it waives the ticket expenses for arts and cultural events, which is a huge promotion of equity. If students attended every single arts and cultural event right now, they'd spend $325 to $975. However, with the fee implemented after just 3 events, they'd be saving significant amounts of money. The arts and culture fee also promotes our university's values of equity, cultural diversity in the arts, and never has it been more apparent the need to invest in an education that is culturally diverse. Artists in general across this nation have really suffered and sacrificed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Many lost their jobs, their audiences, and their spark, yet students today realize the vulnerability of the arts in an ever-changing world, and they want to be a catalyst for change. I'm speaking to the benefits of this fee today as someone who values the arts and believes in everything I'm speaking to now, but also because 74% of the student body voted in favor of implementing this fee. That's more than a supermajority of students who want this fee despite the struggles of COVID. The University of Montana is also aligning itself with the student interests. I believe it is also in your best interest to do the same by considering the implementation of the arts and culture fee in your future deliberations. And thank you for letting me have a few more seconds of your time.
Thank you, Noah. Any additional public comment?
Chair Lozar, I'm giving it just a second in case any hands come up, but I do not see any.
Additional public comments? Okay, seeing no additional public comments, we'll move on to the taking action on the May meetings, action items. We're going to start with the Academic Research and Student Affairs Committee. Pull those up. So we have 3 action items under the ARSA committee. I will entertain a motion to approve action item A, request for approval to revise. We remove this action from this meeting. We will actually move on to action item B. So I will move to, or I'll entertain a motion to approve action item B. So request for approval. Moved by Regent Buchanan. Is there any public comment or any comment from members of the board? Any comment from the members? Is there any comment or discussions from the campuses? If so, please use the raise your hand feature or dial *9 if joining by phone. Is there any public comment? Is there any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. We'll move it on to action item C. I will entertain a motion to approve action item C, request to plan proposals.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Rogers. Is there any discussion or corrections from members of the board? Is there any discussion or corrections from campuses? If so, please use the raise your hand feature or dial *9 if joining by phone. Is there any public comment? Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Move on to no action items in the 2-year and community college committee. We'll move on to the budget, admin, and audit committee. I will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Dombrowski. Is there any discussions or corrections from members of the board? Is there any discussion or corrections from campuses? If so, please use the raise your hand feature or dial *9 if joining by phone. Is there any public comment? Any public comment? No public comment. I will call for the vote. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. We'll move on to action item A. I'll entertain a motion to approve the 2023 biennial budget recommendations.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Sexton. Is there any discussion or corrections from members of the board? Yeah, Regent.
Chair Lozar, I would like to propose an amendment to remove the proposed 3% resident undergraduate hike in FY 23 as part of this action.
Okay. So in terms of the amendments, do we?
Need a second.
Needs a second.
Need a second.
Doesn't have a
Oh,
second.
yep. Is there a second on the amendment? Is there a second on the amendment? Seeing no second on the amendment, thank you, Regent Buchanan. Is there any other discussions or corrections from members of the board? Is there any discussion or corrections from campuses? If so, please use the raise your hand feature and dial *9 if joining by phone. Is there any public comment? Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Motion passes. Move on to action item B. I will entertain a motion to approve a request for approval of the FY 2022 tuition and mandatory fee rates for FECC.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Bao. Is there any discussions or corrections from members of the board? Yep.
I thought Regent Nystuen comments were fantastic. These are community generated proposals and yield a lot of deference to our partners in the different communities we're discussing the community college tuition hikes.
Thanks, Regent Buchanan. Any other discussions or corrections from members of the board? Is there any discussion or corrections from campuses? Is there any public comment? Any public comment? All right, seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. We'll move on to action item C, and I will entertain a motion to approve the request for approval for the 2022 tuition and mandatory fees for Dawson Community College. Moved by Regent Rogers. Is there any discussion or corrections from members of the board? Is there any discussion or corrections from campuses? If so, please use the raise your hand feature or dial *9 if joining by phone. Is there any public comment? Is there any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Moving on to action item D. I will entertain a motion to approve the request for approval for 2023 biennium tuition and mandatory fee rates for Miles Community College.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Dombrowski. Is there any discussions or corrections from members of the board? Is there any discussion or corrections from the campuses? Is there any public comment? Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Moving on to action item E, I will entertain a motion to approve the request for authorization and approval to proceed with infrastructure projects authorized by the 67th legislative session.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Bao. Is there any discussions or corrections from members of the board? Is there any discussion or corrections from the campuses? Is there any public comment? Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Moving on to action item F. I will entertain a motion to approve the request for authorization to remodel Knowles Hall.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Dombrowski. Is there any discussion or corrections from members of the board? Any discussion or corrections from the campuses? Is there any public comment? Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Let's move on to action item G. I'll entertain a motion to approve the request for authorization to construct a new dining facility at University of Montana, Missoula.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Sexton. Is there any discussion or corrections from members of the board? Any discussion or corrections from campuses? Is there any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Moving on to action item H, I will entertain a motion to approve the request for authorization to amend its bond indenture for Montana State University Bozeman.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Buchanan. Is there any discussion or corrections from members of the board? Is there any discussion or corrections from the campuses? And is there any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Moving on to action item I, I'll entertain a motion to approve the request for approval of spending authority for additional COVID relief funding.
So moved.
By Regent Dombrowski. Is there any discussion or corrections from members of the board? Is there any discussion or corrections from the campuses? Is there any public comment? Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Moving on to the last item for the budget committee, I will entertain a motion to approve the request for designation of distribution of timber sales revenue.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Rogers. Any discussion or corrections from members of the board? Any discussion or corrections from the campuses? Any public comment? Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. All right, motion passes. Right, so next on the agenda are two appeals. You have each received the commissioner's decision and the written appeal with supporting documents submitted by the appellant. The board will address each appeal separately. The issue before the board in each case is solely whether to hear the appeal at a later meeting. Our appeal policy does not require us to accept an appeal if we are satisfied with the commissioner's review and decision. The sole question is whether any regent believes the issues addressed in the commissioner's decision need further review by the board. If you do not wish to hear a specific appeal at the board level, it is not necessary to make a motion. A lack of action on our part will signify our decision not to hear the case. Please note that these appeals are confidential. The board will not address the individuals involved by name, identify the campuses involved, or discuss the facts or specific issues. Are there any general questions as to this procedure before we consider the first appeal? Okay, I will entertain a motion to hear appeal number 1. Okay, there being no motion to hear this appeal, the request that we entertain this appeal is denied and the commissioner's decision is upheld. Moving on to appeal number 2, I will entertain a motion to hear appeal number 2. Okay, there being no motion to hear this appeal, the request that we entertain this appeal is denied. The commissioner's decision is upheld. All right. We can move on to the last item on the May meeting, the election of officers, our annual election that occurs in May every year, and I'll turn it over to Commissioner Christian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the board, pursuant to your Article 4 of the bylaws, it calls for you to elect a chair and a vice chair to serve for the next year, sometime after May 1, which is the appropriate time at our May meeting. So we'll do that. Is there any questions about what we're going to do? With that, then I would open up nominations for an individual from your ranks to serve as chair for the following year. Are there any nominations for chair? Regent Dombrowski.
If willing, I would nominate the current chair, Casey Lozar, for chair for next year.
Thank you, Regent Dombrowski. Are there any other nominations? Any further nominations? Seeing none, I will close the nominations and we can take action on that item. Seeing that we have a nomination for Regent Lozar to serve as chair for the upcoming year, is there any discussion on that motion? Regent Rogers.
Yeah, thank you for the nomination, Regent Dombrowski. I'm just want to express my support for this motion. I really appreciate the leadership that Casey has demonstrated and delegated during the last few years. It's been an interesting and challenging time on the board, and I have so much confidence in the approach that he has, the care that he has for the system, and bringing a unique voice to the table that ensures that all of our campus communities and vulnerable populations are heard. So I appreciate the nomination. I'll plan to support it.
Any further? Regent Bao.
Commissioner, thank you. Yeah, I think we should recognize Chair Lozar's accomplishments this year. Always difficult in a COVID environment, and in particular, his day job has been, extremely busy, and he has maintained a very good grip on what we're doing and organizing the board and the board meetings, and I think he should be recognized for that. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Is there any public comment? Amy, I don't have the press star 9, all that stuff, but is there any public comment? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Mr. Chair, congratulations and thank you for serving. Appreciate it. So at this time, I'd open up nominations for an individual amongst you to serve as vice chair for the following year. Are there any nominations? Regent Sexton.
Thank you, Commissioner Christian. If willing, I would like to nominate Regent Brian Rogers to serve as vice chair.
Thank you, Regent Sexton. Are there any further nominations? Seeing none, I can close the nominations. Is there any discussion around the nomination for Regent Rogers to serve as vice chair? Regent Dombrowski.
Similar to Regent Rogers' comments about Regent Lozar, I would make the same comments for Regent Rogers. I think she has sort of stepped in an unfilled role and has done a marvelous job, and I really appreciate that and would support you.
Any further discussion? Regent Cannon.
Yeah, this would go for both Regent Rogers and Regent Lozar. Just the amount of collaboration that you have facilitated, some prickly conversations as I rejoined this board has just been remarkable. It's certainly understandable that from policy perspective, we're going to have different opinions, but as far as providing leadership to draw consensus and draw direction, I've just been so impressed and very excited to continue to work for both of you in leadership roles. Thank you for stepping in.
Regent Sexton, thank you.
Chair Christian, I nominated Regent Rogers because I feel she's done an amazing job with the leadership on the ARSA committee. I want to recognize her, the mentorship that I've benefited from her personally. And I also really value the amount of time and attention that she puts into every issue that is before us, and the research that and the time that she puts in outside of our meetings to really fully educate herself on the topics at hand. I also really appreciate the communication both from Regent Rogers and from Regent Chair Lozar. It's been excellent, and I have full faith in their leadership abilities. So.
Regent Sexton. Any further discussion?
Yeah. Thank you, Commissioner. For the same reasons, I think that both Regent Buchanan and Dombrowski and Sexton are showing their support of Regent Rogers. The one thing I would sort of elevate to is just how embedded you've been in your community. I know, particularly in Bozeman, that you've had consistent conversations not only with the campus community but also the broader community. And that's something I I think we all should do even more of. And I think you're a good example for all of us to make sure that we're sort of anchored to our communities and help us make informed decisions. So I really appreciate that. And certainly, as Regent Buchanan mentioned, you've done just an incredible job over the last, in particular, several months of being a great resource for all the regents and myself. And it would be an honor to serve alongside you.
Any further discussion? Is there any public comment? Seeing none, we're ready to call for the vote. All those in favor of Regent Rogers serving as vice chair signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Regent Rogers, thank you. Congratulations. And honestly, on behalf of all of us that work in the MUS, thanks to all of you for your service. Truly, it is, people have no idea the dedication and the time and the commitments that you all have to make to be part of this board. So we thank you all, and in particular, thank our new leadership team, Chair Lozar and Vice Chair Rogers, for your willingness to serve in these roles. Just a little more additional time on top of the already demanding amount of time. So thank you both for serving, and we look forward to a year ahead. So thank you. Mr. Chair.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Commissioner. And we will adjourn today's meeting, and we will meet again in our strategic planning meeting.
Can I ask a question on that? As we think about that agenda, we've just had a couple of discussions in the last few days that I feel like might be an opportunity to at least see if they fit into that agenda. So as that's crafted, if we could identify portals for suggestions, that would be great.
Without a doubt. And certainly in years past and this year, we'll get some insights from the board to help build out that agenda. Again, I believe it's July. Right now, it's on the agenda for July 15th and 16th. I think typically we set aside 2 days, just knowing that sometimes we have our board evaluations, which we did last year. So there may be a chance that we do it in 1 day, but we can get some communication out to the team and figure out what we want to do. Thanks. Yeah, Regent Sexton.
Thank you, Chair Lozar. If I may, I just wanted to thank everybody for an absolutely amazing year. It's been incredible. They're all doing such fantastic work, and I've been impressed by just the breadth of knowledge, expertise, intelligence, skill, and talent that I've had the privilege to work with. So I'd say an enormous thank you. I know it's been a super challenging year with COVID and the way that we've had to conduct meetings, but it's been really meaningful. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you, Regent Sexton.
Mr. Chair, I would extend our thanks to Regent Sexton. As some may or may not know, the student regent is up for a nomination the 1st of July of each year. And so that process is ahead of us. Appreciate all your efforts in a very challenging year. I would also extend some thanks to our team here, Amy, Jared, Marlis, and Edwina out manning the gates out front and watching online, helping to coordinate all this. So they've got it down to a pretty good science. We appreciate all that they've worked through in the last year to make these meetings happen and make them happen as seamlessly as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Wonderful. Any other comments? All right, meeting adjourned.
Great work, everyone.